Monday, June 22nd through electronic participation, Zoom video conferencing to order. The records will be maintained according to the Town of Cobourg retention bylaw. If you require more specific information, then please contact our municipal clerk's office. With that being stated, Deputy Mayor, over to you for agenda additions.
Thank you, Your Worship. There are 4 this evening. Just to confirm with the Mr. Lambert, that's the 4 that I saw on the agenda when I printed it.
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay. The first is delegation from Todd Obelholzer, the Ale House Restaurant, requesting the use of 2 parking spaces in front of 240 and 246 Division Street to be used as an outdoor licensed patio extension. The second is a delegation from Bryan Lambert, Cobourg Resident, regarding the Waterworks request for the Town of Cobourg to borrow $2.3 million to replace aging water meters. The third is a memo from the Director of Public Works regarding the approval to increase the Town of Cobourg Route number 2 transit service. And the fourth is a memo from the Secretary of the Downtown Business Improvement Area Board of Management, DBIA, regarding a recommendation to Council on the closure of King Street from Spring Street to McGill Street for a pedestrian-friendly zone. Action recommended that the matters be added to the agenda.
Any comments from members of council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interests from members of council? Let's see. Seeing none, we can proceed. And Mr. Larmer, back to you for presentation comment.
So, Your Worship, just for our presentations, the police service chair as well as the chief will be coming to the June 29th meeting. That was an error on my part. I invited them a little bit earlier. So that gives more time for the review of the annual report, and then they'll be back into council on the 29th, if that's okay. Apologize for that miscommunication on my part.
Certainly understandable, Mr. Larmer, with all the work that you're handling. So thank you for that. And Mr. Larmer, I believe we're off to delegations.
Yes, Your Worship, members of council. First, we have 3 delegations. First delegation we have is Jenna Fitzgerald of George and Orange Restaurant, requesting the exemption to the parking provisions of the zoning bylaw pursuant to section 6.1.3 of the zoning bylaw for a restaurant patio extension.
Okay.
And I'm just gonna move Jenna. There she is. Perfect.
And Jenna, welcome to our very first for you virtual council meeting. We look forward to your delegation. Just to remind you, roughly, you have approximately 10 minutes. If you get close to that time, I'll give you a heads up accordingly.
Just had to unmute Jenna. There you go.
Good.
Perfect. Yep.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, councillors, and staff. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to speak with you all regarding my request to provide my business, George and Orange, an exemption to the parking provisions of the zoning bylaw. I just want to start by thanking the staff of the Town of Cobourg for their help through this process. I really appreciate the guidance and the options that I was given for my particular situation. I have experienced firsthand the deep impacts of COVID-19 on the restaurant sector. With the current restrictions and guidelines, I am only able to have 10 guests at a time on my existing patio. And once phase 3 begins and restaurants are given the green light to allow guests to dine indoors, I will be limited to 6 inside with the physical distancing guidelines due to the size of my dining area. These capacity restrictions have and will continue to contribute to a major loss of revenue. I was able to reopen this past weekend, and my sales compared to the same weekend in June 2019 were down 65%. Through these times, I've also had to lay off 4 employees. I am at an advantage of having parking space on my private property that I can utilize to bring my capacity to 40 guests, but I understand that there are procedures in place to protect the citizens of Cobourg. My request to council is this. In light of the impact that COVID-19 is having on restaurants, and in order to leverage the opportunity to expand outdoor patios as per stage 2 of the provincial reopening framework, I am asking council to provide George and Orange with an exemption to the parking provisions of the zoning bylaw pursuant to section 6.1.3 of the zoning bylaw and section 40 of the Planning Act, together with an agreement specifying the terms and conditions and monetary compensation associated with the temporary exemption. Thank you so much for your time and consideration. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jenna, for a most succinct presentation or delegation. Clarification from members of council. I have one, if you don't mind, Jenna. You indicated a temporary. Is that in alignment with the provincial order as long as the emergency is in effect, or did you have another date in mind?
No, as long as the emergency is in effect, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or clarification from members of council? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Mr. Larmer?
All right, and Jenna, if you just stay on, if you mute your video, you'll be able to hear the delegation action.
Okay, thank you.
Next, your worship. Members of council, we have delegation number 2, and we have Ms. Todd Oberholzer, the Ale House Restaurant, requesting the use of 2 parking spaces in front of 240 and 246 Division Street, Cobourg, to be used as an outdoor licensed patio extension. I will unmute Mr. Alban.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you for everybody to give me a chance to plead my case, I guess. Jenna's was much more succinct than I had ever expected, and I wasn't nearly as well prepared for this. Due to the problem that I have at present, I do not have a patio and am not able to open and have been closed now for 3.5 months. I would like to be allowed to use the 2 parking spots on Division Street located between 240 Division and 246 Division, which is my location, for the use of a patio during, I guess, this time of pandemic. I don't have much else to say or ask. I'm just would like to have a little bit of income because I haven't had any, and my staff is all laid off.
Okay. And thank you, Todd. I just want to make sure I'm not cutting you off. Is that basically the points you wish to make?
Yeah, that's all I really, it's the only place I could really put a patio, if allowed.
Okay, thank you. Questions of clarification, members of council? Councillor Beattie?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you, and thank you for the presentation. This is more of a question to the Director of Public Works, if I may. I recall we discussed very briefly patios into parking spaces when we last gathered. I'm just wondering if Director Wills could comment on anything that Council should take into consideration with this delegation's request.
Director Wills?
Sure, thank you through you to Councillor Beattie. Definitely this is something that we've been looking into through the patio review committee amongst staff. We're definitely open to having patios within parking spots. The only issue being that typically these patios are raised up to meet the curb height, which takes a little bit of extra planning and cost on behalf of the businesses in order to get to allow for accessibility and safety. Also, they do have to be enclosed. I believe the typical expansions to patios right now don't have to be perfectly fenced off like they would under normal circumstances, but with it being within the roadway, we would expect it to be enclosed. A good example is I believe it's the Thirsty Goose in Port Hope. The way that their patio is set up is similar to what we would be expecting for safety and accessibility concerns.
Hey, Councillor Beattie, does that help per your question? Okay, thank you. Any other clarification questions? Seeing none, then Todd, thank you for your delegation, and
Thank you.
actions will come out after we receive all delegations. Mr. Larmer?
So Todd, if you just stay on, I'm going to mute you and you can be able to hear the delegation actions when they come up. Okay.
Okay.
So next, your worship, Mr. Lambert has joined us. So your worship, next on delegations, we have a delegation from Bryan Lambert, Cobourg Resident, regarding the Waterworks request for the Town of Cobourg to borrow $2.3 million to replace aging water meters. I believe Mr. Lambert has joined us. I just want to make sure. Yep. Yes.
Welcome, Brian. I know you certainly are aware of our council delegations. I'll remind you if we get close to the 10-minute mark, but otherwise we look forward to your delegation.
Just have to unmute Mr. Lambert.
Brent.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Whoops. I'm going to start at slide 11, please. Okay, this is a somewhat abbreviated presentation. The first 11 slides are on a very related topic and something I feel quite strongly about, but on consideration and consultation with others, I've decided that that topic would be best presented to councillors individually and go from there. So this is a little bit different. This is about the future water rates. Waterworks through LUSI has proposed a $2.3 million loan to finance the purchase of water meters to be able to convert their remaining stock of old water meters. The periodic replacement of the water meters and so on is really not the issue. The issue is why depart from the plan that they've been following before of doing more or less 1,000 a year or 1,000 a year. And so it's, you know, why go for the whole shot at once? And have they really thought that through? And the proposal that came to council back in January was really very disappointing. And Mr. Strauss and I both expressed our concerns and questions about that. It was error-ridden. There were missing assumptions, missing analysis, and just generally it was problematic. And you can see some of the problems, very basic arithmetic kind of problems that shouldn't exist in a proposal to a board level organization such as council. So Mr. Strauss noted, among other things, that the interest cost of the loan would be about 800 grand. And that was significantly more than the 193,000 that the sales discount, next slide please, would garner. Mr. Powell indicated this wouldn't be a problem and that the loan could be for 5 years and that would reduce the interest cost. That's true, but the cash flow that would be required to service that loan would go from the 191,000 proposed to 507,000, more than 2.5 times the original proposal. No indication whatever of how that would be accomplished. Mr. Davey has told us that these loans and so on have to be serviced from the revenues raised by water rates. Waterworks is a standalone operation, and that's provincially mandated. So how's the cash flow going to be funded? And we get into other issues on the same vein. In 2015, the clarifier was proposed at a cost of $6 million. The project is deferred until 2024. And at that time, the cost is likely to be in the $8 to $10 million range. There was supposed to have been, according to Watson, back in 2015, a reserve fund set up and contributions made, and the debt to, or the reserve to debt ratio at that time was about 80-20. That's now changed, and depending on when you read the various updates, it's now flipped right over, and it's about 80% debt and 20% reserve, maybe, in 2024. So that's a worrisome thing. Where's the money going to come from to service that debt? Okay, depending on the end, LUSI, or more correctly, Waterworks, I keep making that error, borrowed, quote unquote, $800,000 from a Waterworks reserve to fund, in part, the water tower. Okay, that has to be replaced. Where's that cash flow going to come from? All in all, depending on which assumptions you make, I did a really rough estimate, back of the napkin kind of thing, on what would be the required water rates increases. The answer is 12 to 18% from the current 9%. 9% from 2015 to current date is an increase of 167%. In 2022, if nothing changes, that increase will have doubled the rate from 2015. You can well imagine what 12 to 18% increases would do. Cobourg has a significant seniors population, and for a lot of them, their income is pension-based, Canada pension, old age security, maybe a company pension. They typically get 2% cost of living increase. Other people working in town, many of them at minimum wage or not much above, and what are their increases like? They certainly can't afford 12 to 18%. Next slide. Okay. So I think the bottom line message out of this is, without knowing what the impact is on future water rates, how can the council make a good evidence-based decision to approve this loan? And I remind you, it's not really a loan. Waterworks is a wholly owned business unit within the town. Okay? Now, the town may have to go to an outside agency like Ontario Infrastructure to get the loan, but it's not, borrow 2.3 million from the town. It doesn't work that way. As Mayor Henderson has said on some previous occasions, it's putting the cart before the horse. There's been no information provided to council as to what the effect on future water rates is going to be as a result of this $2.3 million loan, and some of the other things that Waterworks has to contend with. Their annual capital requirement for capital repairs and additions typically runs $2 to $2.5 million. That has to be funded out of those rates. Additions to the clarifier reserve have to be funded out of those rates. $190,000, $200,000 is required for debt service if the $2.3 million loan goes ahead. All of these things add up, and 9% won't cut it. And I think until council knows what the expected rate is, I'm hard pressed to understand how they can move forward and approve this. Is there any real rush? Are water mains breaking, or water meters breaking down all over the city. Can they not wait for Wilson to report or Watson to report? And then they will have some indication of what the rates are that will be required to support these debt loads and the cash flow. Those are my comments, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attention.
Okay,
I'm sorry. The ask is basically wait for the Watson report, and that will give council a much clearer picture of what is required in terms of rate increases to support the debt levels. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Are there questions, clarification from Mr. Lambert? Councillor Darling?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just wondered in Mr. Lambert's report or slide presentation earlier, he referred to a letter that was myself and Deputy Mayor had asked for from Mr. Paul to answer the assumptions made by the CTA by Mr. Strauss and Mr. Lambert. Mr. Paul did provide that letter for us as a clarification and answers to all the concerns that the CTA had. And I just wanted to read his last, Mr. Paul's last points in the letter. It says, you know, Mr. Lambert made a lot of assumptions here. We don't know if they're accurate or if they're not, but Mr. Paul has made some assumptions also. His assumptions, if we do borrow the 2.3 million, is that there's an immediate savings of 193,000. There will be decrease in water meter reading costs, about 70,000 annually. There will be 114,000 plus compounded annually accurate additional revenues from these accurate meters. So when I add those numbers together quickly, 193,000 plus over 4 years, 4 times 7 is 28, 280,000 plus 114 annually for 4 years. I didn't add the 3. I come up to well over $800,000 in revenue or savings. So to me, that more than offsets the cost of borrowing the money. And we get accurate meters. Another concern of mine is that the amount of water loss. We bring in water from the lake and we treat it, and the amount of water we're getting paid for is substantially less than what we're treating. A portion of that water is lost due to leaks in mains and whatnot, but a large portion is also lost due to inaccurate metering. So delaying this for 4 years, to me, is not good business. We do realize there will be costs. He talks about the interest rates. Well, the interest rates are only an assumption at this time. They will not be set until such time as the loan is made. And right now with the pandemic.
Councillor Darling, I just remind if you have point of clarification because.
Yes, thank you.
Right?
Yeah, okay, but my clarification would be the fact that there is in excess of 800,000 in revenue, which contradicts what Mr. Lambert is saying. I will bring up the other issues further on in our agenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, in response to that, I would like to say that Mr. Strauss dealt with the items that Councillor Darling is referring to and basically ripped them apart.
Well,
They're
again,
seriously flawed.
this is not a debate session. This is for clarification for members of
Darling
council.
has made it a debate, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I corrected that. I was waiting for clarification. So right now I'm asking for clarification from members of council on your delegation. Seeing none, thank you. Mr. Larmer?
Yes, Your Worship. Next comes delegation actions.
And I believe the first action, because of the mention of section 40, I'll go under planning, which would be Councillor Beatty. for Ms. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have prepared a delegation action with the assumption that it would fall to planning. The action recommended is that Council receive Jenna Fitzgerald of George and Orange's presentation for information purposes, and further that Council provide George and Orange with an exemption to the parking provisions of the zoning bylaw pursuant to Section 6.13 of the zoning bylaw and Section 40 of the Planning Act, together with an agreement specifying the terms and conditions and monetary compensation, a minimum of $1, associated with the temporary exemption.
Okay, thank you. Does any member of council need that read again? Seeing no questions, all those in favor?
Question.
Councillor Darling?
Yes, I want to make sure that Mr. McGlashan has, I think that Councillor Beattie would have checked with Mr. McGlashan prior, or just if Mr. McGlashan has any concerns or comments.
I believe she has, but I'll thank you for that. I'll double check. Director McGlashan?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And correct, we have collaborated both with Ms. Fitzgerald and Councillor Beattie on this matter, and this seems like a reasonable approach given the circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. McGlashan.
Okay, any other questions, clarification? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion read by Councillor Beattie? Against? Carried. Mr. Larmer?
Next, Your Worship, the second delegation action would be protection services.
Okay, and Councillor Burkett, to you for Mr. Oberholzer.
Your Worship, it could be both protection service and public works. Basically, if I just can comment on this, allowing for it on municipal right of way, which would be the roadway, which kind of is in the jurisdiction of public works, but also be an exemption of the outdoor patio bylaw to allow for that to happen, which is protection services. It falls under kind of my preview. So I guess you could open up to both of them if they want to make an action recommended or someone.
Well, I did go to Councillor Burkett. If we'll start with that, and we'll see where Councillor Darling is. Councillor Burkett.
Thank you, Your Worship. The action recommended that we refer this matter to staff to look into options for this proponent to open the patio within those two spaces.
And could I request perhaps, Councillor Burkett, you may use the two addresses? That might be helpful to be more specific if you could add that.
Okay, so action recommended that staff work with Ale House Restaurant to allow for the two parking spaces in front of 240 and 246 Division Street to be used as an outdoor patio extension.
Yeah, and I believe it would be a licensed patio extension.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of clarification? Councillor Barreau?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Burkett. I do like your motion or your delegation action, but I think we're in a time of emergency where this gentleman hasn't been open for over 3 months without any income. From Director Wills, the two major things was making sure that the patio was raised to the curb and that it was fenced. So if possible, I would like to make an amendment to allow for those and issue him his permits right away, if that's possible.
So Councillor Bureau, so basically that is what I'm asking staff to do, is work with the owner to come to some kind of agreement, basically directing staff to do such a thing.
I get that. But just like the permit for George and Orange, I think we have to make sure that we have this gentleman open. Is there any way of leniency of you making action of, how can I put it? Having it immediately opened, and once he has it set up, staff can expect it, and then he can open.
Can I, Mr. Larmer, speak to that, Your Worship?
Well, I would ask perhaps Director Wills, could you make a comment accordingly?
I can just start out, Your Worship, just and you can follow up on the infrastructure part. So just very briefly, a summary of the two requests that are in council's decision making tonight was the one for Georgian Orange and then this one. The Georgian Orange is quite separate from this. The reason for that is there's planning back provisions. It's under the zoning bylaw, under the actual Planning Act, Section 40, which is different because there's a requirement for parking based on certain lots, and that's something the director has done and worked with that. This particular application basically is based on municipal right-of-way, so highway. Right now, we don't permit any occupancy of any parking spaces on the municipal right-of-way right now. So what is going to have to happen is we're going to have to make an amendment to the bylaw, or not even amendment. We'll have to bring an exemption request back with an easement agreement with the business owner. Come back to council, just a separate kind of jurisdiction area. It's under a separate bylaw, and they're using the municipal right-of-way. In regards to Councillor Burkett's part about immediately, just like with every application that comes in, especially with an outdoor patio extension, the Liquor License Act, we act immediately on that process. So I don't think there's need for that wording there. We go as fast as we can. The jurisdiction for extension of patios doesn't rest with council, it rests with myself under the statutory obligation of the Liquor License Act, Liquor Control Act. And we go through various processes for that. There's always that appeal to the authority, which is council, which could happen, but we have yet to have that issue happen. But what happens is this particular business does not have an existing patio, nor a licensed patio under the Alcohol Gaming Commission of Ontario. Thus, they have to apply to us to allow us to temporarily extend their liquor license, which is permissible now with the authority and the permission of the municipality until January 1st of 2021. Sorry, yeah, 2021 at about 3 a.m. in the morning. So what we would do if council directs this, we would prepare the necessary agreements. We would put that to council for next Monday, as long as there's going to be extra provisions provided from Public Works in there regarding this easement agreement, and then brief for council's debate on that purpose. And then we would enter into the kind of the site plan, the physical distancing, spacing between tables and those kind of requirements. And then we'd issue that non-objection letter to the license. That's kind of a summary of how it would work. But we would do it as quick as possible. And the director can follow up with any Public Works restrictions.
So in summary to Councilor Burrell, I believe that staff, from listening to Director Wills, Brent Larmer, our town clerk, are going to work in a collaborative manner with Todd and everything they can do to make this happen. But you can see it's probably going to take most of the week to have this prepared officially to come back to council on Monday the 29th. So at this point, can you tell me where you are? Do you still wish to make an amendment, or do you wish to withdraw that?
No, that's good. I just feel for all the businesses that are out there, and I do thank the town clerk, Mr. Larmer, and Director McGlashan and Director Wills for all their work in helping all the patios all across Cobourg and getting them up and open so quick. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And does somebody want the motion read again from Councillor Burkett? Seeing none, I'll put that on the floor. All those in favor? Against? Carried. And the third delegation will be discussed in item number 1, I believe, under general government. So, Mr. Larmer, I believe we're off to general government with the deputy mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. First item is the correspondence from Dereck Paul, President and CEO of Lakefront Utility Services, Inc., LUSI, regarding the radio frequency water meter replacement program. I've got a new motion that I had Mr. Larmer sent to all members of council this afternoon, and I will read it now, as I guess you've got it on the screen. Okay, thank you. The action recommended that council receive the correspondence for information purposes and further that council provide direction on the request for the Town of Cobourg Waterworks to borrow funds to complete the radio frequency water meter replacement program for the Town of Cobourg, in the Town of Cobourg. And whereas a report was presented to the Committee of the Whole meeting on January 6, 2020 from Lakefront Utility Services, Inc., LUSI, who operate the waterworks of the Town of Cobourg under an agreement with the Town of Cobourg. And whereas 3 possible options for the replacement of water meters were presented to council. Option 1 was to continue a current path of replacing 1,000 residential meters annually and 75,000 of commercial meters changed for a total cost of $480,248 to be done in 2021. Option 2, the completion of the RF project in 2020 by changing all 4,000 remaining residential meters and 309 commercial meters in 2020, plus installing the AMI system at a cost of $2,297,052. And option 3 was a 50% installation in 2020 by changing 2,000 of the remaining residential meters in 2020, plus 309 commercial meters for a cost of $884,818. And whereas council received a report from Ian Davey, Treasurer, Director of Corporate Services on June 1st, 2020, indicating that the cost of servicing this potential new debt of $2.3 million for option 2 would be included in the calculation of water rates with no impact on the Town of Cobourg operating budget for property tax concerned. Therefore, be it resolved that given the yet unknown and full financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic for the Town of Cobourg, and considering our residential and commercial customers who have suffered losses, council instruct the interim CAO to implement option 1 to continue the current path of replacing 1,000 residential meters annually and 75,000 of commercial meters changed for a total cost of $480,248 to be done in 2021 and paid for by Waterworks capital budget. And that once the water rate study currently underway by Watson and Associates is complete and the actual impact of any debt servicing costs is built on a new rate schedule for resident and commercial customers is known, that option 2 be considered for the 2022 budget deliberations commencing in September 2021. I guess the reason for putting this forward, Your Worship, because there are still a lot of uncertain times and we really don't know what this impact of these water rates is going to be. And I, for one, feel very uncomfortable with resident and commercial getting an increase in their water rates until we really know how this COVID-19 is going to plan out and whether or not there will be a second wave when more and more businesses will also be without revenue or income. That was pretty much the rationale for putting this forward as is, and it's continuation of how Waterworks has been replacing the meters up until now. I'll take any questions from members of council. Councillor Darling.
Yes, as I got a little off track there before with Mr. Lambert during the questioning, I would like to add my comments at this time. The Deputy Mayor mentioned the COVID, and if Mr. Paul's figures here are accurate, there will be no increase, no or very little increase in the water rates to actually pay the debt load. Again, I'll reiterate what Mr. Paul put in his letter, which all the council did receive a copy, that there was immediate savings of $198,300 for the new meters, a decrease in meter reading costs for approximately $70,000 annually. Now, I've just took in 3 years, as 2020 will probably be over before they really get this in play. 114,000 compounded inaccurate additional revenues. The revenue stream from the inaccurate meters is costing everybody. So those who are getting water at less of a rate because their meters are inaccurate. Everybody else is paying for that. So we need to have meters that read accurately. So there's 3 years at 114,000. And then so when I add those figures up, the 70, the 3 times 70, 3 times 114, and 193, I get 745,000. And with, like I said earlier, with the interest rates being as low as they are now because of the pandemic, it might be a real good time to get a loan. And the other thing is the water loss that we have. Like I said, I don't have the figures in front of me, but in the annual report from LUSI, we take so much water in every month, and we bill for so much of it, but there's a large percentage that goes unbilled, and it's due to inaccurate meters and the fact that there are some leaks in the system itself. So if we can reduce the amount of water we're treating and get paid for it without it going to waste, then again, that's a win-win. And these meters that are in place now are 45 years old, and in the next 3 to 4 years, if we have multiple breakdowns in meters, there's much more maintenance cost involved. So I'm going to propose an amendment, and the amendment will read that council receive this correspondence for information purposes, and further that council direct LUSI to proceed with option 2, completion of the RF project in 2020 by changing all 4,000 remaining residential meters and 309 commercial meters in 2020, plus installing the AMI system at an approximate cost of $2.3 million. I'll leave it at that, short and sweet, for further discussion from other members of council.
Thank you, Councillor Darling. Any other comments on Mr. Darling's amendment? Councillor Charling?
Thank you. I appreciate the amendment, but at this time, I'm also uncomfortable without having a full understanding of the impact on water rates. And I have expressed concerns about the increasing water rates that we've already approved. I think the time is not right. I would prefer the Watson report to be completed so that we can get a better understanding of the impact of this borrowing on water rates for residents and businesses in the town of Cobourg. So I can't support the amendment. I can support the original motion.
Any other comments? Mayor Henderson?
Is it appropriate for me to direct a question through you to Dereck Paul? I see he's on the screen for a question. Is that permissible as you as chair or not? I'm just asking.
Of course. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Paul, I know there's concern by council on the outcome of the water rates later on. We're under Associates of Watson, the economists at this time in our water rates. I believe they are running at 9% currently. Are you able to share with council what, if any, effect this motion put forward by Councillor Darling may have on that outcome of water rates at this time?
I know that, thank you, Your Worship. I know that CN Watson is working with our engineer firm, SEMA Plus, to have a thorough understanding of the capital expenditures over not only the next 5, but possibly the next 10, 15 years for the Waterworks system. And that report is still currently in the works for presentment to council before the end of this year. With respect to this, the information that Mr. Councillor Darling has indicated, I think the report that was originally submitted and presented at council on January 6th indicate that majority of the costs, the benefits of changing out this meter will be incorporated and have minimal impact to rates. Because we anticipate, similar to how we are budgeting approximately $500,000 each year to pay out for that meter shortly before the 15-year timeline is in the amortization schedule, which is what I had suggested in my dissertation to council. Maybe we borrow the money over a 5 and possibly no later than 10-year period. We may not be able to go to infrastructure in order to do that. we may have to go to a bank. So the benefits of the discount of the purchasing of all the meters and changing out the everything at the same time, as opposed to continue on the path, those were all the benefits associated with that. I trust I've answered the question.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Charlie.
Thank you very much. A question through the chair to Mr. Paul. Thank you, Mr. Paul, for joining us. There seems to be a lot of variables here. Sometimes you've mentioned 5 or a 10-year loan. It's not clear exactly what the interest rate would be. Can you give us a clearer idea of how much interest the town would be paying over the course of this loan?
The interest rates that we have been speaking to with respect to TD Bank is approximately 2.25% right now. The interest rate that was calculated for that report in December was closer to 4%. So I don't exactly have the exact figures, but I can tell you it's drastically reduced from the $800,000 that Mr. Lambert has suggested.
Councillor Charlie.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Just to follow up, my question was also about the length of this loan. You've said 5 years or 10 years. Can you give us an idea of how much interest the town of Cobourg would pay over the course of the loan?
I don't have my financial manager with me right at this moment, and I don't have the information in front of me. But if we borrow from the TD Bank, it would probably be over a 10-year period, and the rates would be, as I mentioned, significantly less than the $800,000.
Any other questions from member of council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote on Councillor Darling's amendment on this motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. So that is the motion. Councillor Darling, I'll ask you to read the motion again for the final motion and the final vote.
Have to unmute Councillor Darling.
Action recommended, council receive the correspondence for information purposes, and further that council direct LUSI to proceed with option 2, completion of the RF project in 2020 by changing all 4,000 remaining residential meters and 309 commercial meters in 2020, plus installing the AMI system at an approximate cost of $2.3 million.
Any further comments from members of council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Next item under general government is a memo from the Senior Financial Analyst regarding the 2019 Remuneration and Expense Council and Local Boards. Action recommended that council receive the report for information purposes pursuant to section 284(1) of the Municipal Act 2001, which requires that council remuneration and expenses paid to each member of council and its local boards be reported to council for the previous year. Are there any questions from members of council on the report? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Mr. Larmer, I believe we're off to Public Works with Councillor Darling. I'm correct?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Larmer. I have a memo from the Director of Public Works regarding the approval to increase the Town of Cobourg Route 2 transit service and the extension of free transit, I take it. Free transit in the Town of Cobourg. The action recommended that council direct staff to reinstate Cobourg Transit Bus Route 2 to match the current route number 1 transit bus operating hours and extend free transit until August 31st, 2020. Any questions in regard to this issue? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, Mr. Larmer.
Mr. Lerner, back to you.
Yes, next, Your Worship, we have Parks and Recreation Services, and we have Chair Councillor Emily Chorley.
Okay, Councillor Chorley.
Item 1 is memo regarding the update on the closure of Cobourg Victoria Beach and review of possible options on the reopening of the Cobourg Beach. And I do have a different action recommended. The reason I have this is that, as Council knows, on June the 1st, Council requested of staff options for how the town could reopen the beach with restricted use. And the report that we've been provided with doesn't provide us with any kind of real detailed options for moving forward. And we've also experienced some changes since June the 1st, where the provincial government has authorized our region to move into stage 2 of the government's reopening plan. So with that in mind, I have an option that I'd like to put on the floor for council's consideration. And this is really something that I would encourage all members of council to adjust, to comment on. There's many points that we can discuss, and we all know how important this is for the community. So the motion I'd like to put on the floor is, whereas on June 1st, 2020, Council approved the closure of Victoria Park Beach and requested a staff report with options for how the town could reopen the beach with restricted use. And whereas the municipality has since been authorized to move to stage 2 in the Ontario government's reopening plan, which came into effect on June 12th, 2020. And whereas all 19 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Northumberland County have been deemed resolved by the HKPR District Health Unit as of June 22nd, 2020. And whereas protecting the health and well-being of Cobourg residents is a key objective of the town's strategic plan and emergency response to the pandemic. Therefore, be it resolved that Council confirms the closure of Victoria Park Beach to normal activity, but instructs staff to prepare for a trial system of restricted access as follows. The fence around Victoria Park Beach will remain in place with gated access points. A limited number of beach passes for use during designated hours will be made available free of charge and on a first come, first served basis via an online booking system. The beach passes will only be valid for a specific date and time, such as a morning pass from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. and an afternoon pass from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. A changeover period between time slots will allow for a smooth transition and rigorous sanitizing of hard surfaces. The number of beach passes made available will be determined based on physical distancing requirements and in consultation with the town's emergency planner and the HKPR District Health Unit. Outside of council-approved hours for the use of beach passes, public access to the beach will be strictly prohibited. Given the reduced number of individuals permitted on the beach, lifeguards will not be deployed, and beach pass applicants must agree to use the beach at their own risk. Beach pass applicants must also answer health screening questions and agree to abide by physical distancing rules and provincial emergency orders. The accessible beach mat will be installed, and beach passes will be made available on a trial basis on weekdays only, Monday to Friday, beginning on July 6, 2020, unless council deems otherwise due to a change of circumstance. And further, that the town of Cobourg continues to communicate that Victoria Park Beach is closed except for those with a valid pass. And further, that the implementation of this trial period be reviewed by council at the Committee of the Whole meeting on July 20th, 2020. And I would just say that the reason I've put this on the floor, again, is for council's consideration. There are many facets that can be adjusted. There are many points of discussion, including the timeline. Lifeguards are something that I think we should have a discussion about. The idea behind this is really about how we can control the numbers on the beach and make sure that we do not have an overcrowding situation. And I'd like to open the floor to any points of question or discussion. Councillor Beattie?
Thank you, Councillor Chorley. I appreciate the well thought out and creative motion you brought forward to us. I'm looking forward to discussing its details and other options with Council in hopes that we are able to come to a consensus that provides a safe and gradual reopening of public facilities such as Victoria Beach to everyone while considering capacity, lifeguarding, public washrooms, and waste management issues. With that said, I do have a few questions. So I'll ask my first one if I may, and then I'll pause, and then if you can come back to me after other councillors have had a moment, that would be great. You did touch on lifeguards, which the safety of swimming and such is important to me, as I'm sure others. Through you, Councillor Chorley, as the chair, to the Director of Hustwick. Director Hustwick, could you comment on what the viability is of hiring lifeguards at this point to support some phased in or gradual or limited reopening of the beach? And if so, any rough estimation as to the cost of hiring those lifeguards?
Your Worship, to Councillor Beattie, or through the chair, I guess. We've been in close contact with the YMCA throughout this period and are currently working with them to open Centennial Pool for July 6th. They are prepared to provide lifeguards for the beach, subject to the decision of Council tonight. I haven't had an update in terms of the capacity of meeting the normal lifeguarding requirements this late in the season. But based on the previous discussions, we believe that they can certainly provide some lifeguarding. But until they start contacting all of the staff and determining who's available, it's really hard to estimate at this point. But they're prepared to move forward, but a decision would really need to be made tonight in order for us to put a plan in place to have lifeguards available for July. And in terms of the costs, I think the lifeguarding aspect for the beach would represent over half of the budget. I don't, perhaps the CAO might have the specific numbers handy, but it would be a shortened season for sure. And I would think it would be under 100,000, and then there would likely be federal support for summer student salaries. So for example, the estimated costs that the YMCA has provided for Centennial Pool based on the different restructured hours and staffing needs was about 100,000, but the federal support has dropped that to approximately 50,000. So I don't have the exact numbers. Again, it would depend on the number of hours of the day, whether weekends are available. But I would think it would be roughly, probably no more than 100,000, but I'd have to estimate that based on parameters dictated by Council.
Okay, thank you, Director Hustwick. I'll just go to any other members of Council who have a question or a comment. Mayor Henderson.
Thank you, Councillor Chorley, as chair. I'm pleased with the number of points that you've highlighted for our concern in our attention. The one I'm wondering about, if we do move on this, personally, I would like to see the beach open Monday through Sunday. I believe if we're going to put the necessary access points and control systems in order to align per what's before us and also alignment with the health unit, I think that could be done through the weekend as well. And then we could get a really good measure of what's the week look like versus what the weekend looks like and what issues are we really dealing with. That's one. My second, if I may, I'm very much for lifeguards as well. I've got a lot of calls about families, certainly young families and children using our beach. I do feel if we have lifeguards, it does minimize the degree of risk management for the town of Cobourg. I just received a quick update from Eunice Kirkpatrick, the YMCA CEO, and she indicated that with enough notice of 2 weeks, she could certainly have a discussion with Mr. Huswick to involve, she's indicating certainly 6 or 8, depending on what the town may desire based on volume of lifeguard individuals. They would require 2 additional individuals if it worked into a long weekend. And of course, times are flexible. I did ask what times they used in past that they were working towards this year if it were a normal year without COVID. And she indicated that the town was working towards the idea of 11 to 8 p.m. because we're finding many people on warm nights stay much longer into the evening. But again, those times can certainly be consolidated or come from staff as recommendations. So again, from Ms. Kirkpatrick's point of view, if council were in agreement, then she feels she can make this happen in dialogue. Again, with Mr. Huswick, she just indicated she would need approximately 14 days notice to put it all together once council decides they wish to move in this direction. So I'll stop there because I'm sure you may have other comments from other members of council.
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. Just so that we stay on the issue of lifeguards, are there any other comments on the issue of lifeguards from members of council? Councillor Darling?
Yes, at this time with we had planned to have lifeguards on for the season, and seeing it's going to be a lower rate that we would have been paying anyhow, I think I'm going to lean towards that we do put the lifeguards on. If we can get the number of lifeguards required for the hours of operation, I agree with the mayor. I'm not really in agreement with the passes morning and afternoon. I would like to see again of hours, be it 10 to 6, 11 to 8, whatever. But I think we could limit the number of points on our motion and let staff make those decisions in accordance with safety issues. Do we have the number of lifeguards and the occupant load that the lifeguards would have to deal with? I have some other issues, but I'll leave that at lifeguards. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other comments about lifeguards? Okay. Just for our own information, I've also been thinking about lifeguards and really could go either way on this. It's very helpful to have the information that Mayor Henderson's brought forward, and also Director Hustwick giving us a better understanding of the cost. I'm just wondering if, Mr. Larmer, do you have any information about what other beaches and municipalities have done regarding lifeguards, specifically in their reaction to COVID-19?
To you, Chair, to members of council. I don't have a lot of the information. I know Community Services did some research both locally in the province, federally, and then abroad. But I do know in some of my earlier research when we were considering this, some of the northern municipalities, like North Bay, have gotten rid of their lifeguard requirement in those areas. So I think the director might be better apt to answer this question regarding that, if that's okay. Sorry, Chair.
Director Hustwick?
Just have to unmute.
I'm sorry, I was just looking at the financials. Sorry, the clerk was asking about other communities with beaches that are open or closed.
Yes, just to clarify, I was wondering if you have any information about what other beaches or other municipalities have done as they open their beaches. Are they choosing to deploy lifeguards where they normally would?
Yeah, some, as the clerk mentioned, some have decided to open beaches without lifeguards and to post the beaches as use at your own risk. City of Toronto, for instance, is, I believe as of today, started their lifeguarding at numerous beaches. So based on discussions with other municipalities, it's a bit of a mix. Some are choosing to proceed with lifeguards and others have decided not to, mainly I think as a cost reduction measure.
Thank you for that. just to simplify the process, I'm wondering if I just simply amend the motion that I have on the floor and we can change the lifeguard line. Can I do that, Mr. Larmer, or do we need to have an amendment?
You can make that change to your motion if you'd like.
So considering the feedback from council, if we adjust that line, it's the fourth bullet point from the bottom, and we can adjust it to quite simply an appropriate number of lifeguards will be deployed. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Beattie?
Sorry, I couldn't find my mouse. Yes, thank you, Councillor Chorley. I do have a few other slight suggested amendments. I did send, for simplicity purposes, I did send the clerk a copy of your motion with just a few suggested edits to each section. Councillor Turley, as the chair, would you just like me to comment on them? And if you are favorable to them, you can add them in. I bolded them to help track them, but I also don't want to make the discussion process complicated. So however you want to receive them, I'm happy to put an amendment on, or if council wants to consider the bolded comments for consideration. I'm not quite sure the best way to receive those.
Great, thank you for your initiative. I think the best way to proceed is, why don't you just talk us through your suggested changes?
Sure. So very briefly, I believe I'm just reading on my Word document. I do believe that the clerk has it on the screen there. Yes, excellent. So just very briefly, in the therefore be it resolved, I just put in a safe and gradual reopen, and also included noting limited capacity, just to be consistent with the bullet points. In the second bullet point, suggested adding in for use by all members of the public to indicate both local residents as well as visitors will be able to access reserving an online beach pass. Striking out the suggested operating times and putting that to 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. or looking to staff for their direction to best reflect other staffing, including lifeguards. This might be redundant, but I just put this in as I was writing this out. Access gates will be managed by summer staff and or a security company who will be responsible for checking pre-booked online beach passes. So just kind of the entry point. That was probably assumed, but every other detail was layered in here, so I thought I'd include that. I struck through lifeguards not being deployed, and instead suggesting to replace that with the appropriate number of lifeguards will be hired for the rest of the summer season to reflect operating hours or to reflect what the director just summarized to us. Just a few more points. The accessible beach mat will be installed with one entry gate being an accessible entrance only. Again, implied, but if we're being as reflective as possible in this motion. And then I think this is more of a question to the clerk, as I was just referring back to the staff report, and under an option of restricted access and monitoring capacity, if a beach regulating bylaw would be required should this a motion of this nature be approved by council.
Great, thank you very much for those suggestions. Can I just ask a quick follow-up question while I've noticed it? The change that you've suggested, as soon as Mr. Larmer holds the screen for a second, the change that you suggested where it was an accessible entrance only, does it need to be only for those who need an accessible entrance, or could other individuals use that entrance as well?
Others could, I'm sure. I just think it's important that we have a dedicated, well, obviously we would ensure that there's always an accessible entrance. I think it would be courteous of us if it was an accessible entrance only with the mat, just given, I mean, if you have the ability to access the other entrances. Again, I would look to the emergency group and the director and staff to configuration, but I noticed typically when the beach is open, just a day-to-day activity, that the accessible mat sometimes gets overrun by, it's not used for its full purpose. And so I just wouldn't want to see our neighbors and visitors and friends who need to, have priority access due to mobility issues. I think if we were able to dedicate an accessible space, if permissible, but yeah, my intention would be that it would be an accessible entrance only for those requiring it.
Great, thank you for the clarification. I'm just wondering if staff can comment on that. Should we have the word only in that line, or is there additional flexibility? I'm looking for some feedback or direction. Mr. Larmer, do you have anything that you can share, or Mr. Hustwick?
I would put that to Mr. Hustwick on the operations of that. Being you probably have another access point and maybe an in and out, something will come back for it, I think, to council after this passes on that. Do you want to follow up, Director?
I mean, I would certainly prefer to have a little more flexibility, because we'll have to work with the police, with the enforcement staff, with emergency services, and internally determining the number of access points and the staffing requirements. Having a designated access point will certainly increase the number of staff required for that particular gate, and the volume may not necessarily warrant a specific gate. We can certainly look at how best to manage accessible access needs through our planning. So I would prefer to have the flexibility, with the understanding that we need to make sure that it's as accessible for everyone as possible.
Great, thank you for that. Are there any other comments on the accessible entrance issue? Councillor Darling.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Charlie. Before I forget, thank you for bringing the motion forward and opening it up for discussion. I appreciate your efforts. To the director and yourself, in my past life on the fire department, whenever you had a restricted area, you had limited access, so you could keep track of the numbers. The more entrances you have, it gets harder to keep track of how many people are on the beach. So you usually had one main entrance with 2 staff on it that monitored the people going in. They could exit at another area, but there were emergency exits, but they had the exit there too, because it's very hard to keep track. If you have an occupant load of 500 people on the beach and somebody comes out, they may want to come out to use the washroom and go back, so they've got to be able to have that kind of in-out access. Yet if they leave for the day, you've got to know they've gone. If you have exits at other points and they leave, then staff may say the beach is full when 50 people have left. So it's very important that we give staff the latitude to determine what exit points they are, how many staff they have to do that. So I think we've got to just, again, make our motion so that we're not doing the operations here. Staff has the idea of what we want to do, and with the number of part-time staff or the number of security, the number of bylaw officers, I mean, I think they have to have the flexibility to be able to make those decisions.
Thanks for your comments, Councillor Darling. Councillor Burkett, did you have a comment?
Really, if we're putting the accessible mat out, as Councillor Beattie said earlier, usually it gets used by a lot of others to cart things down to the end of the beach. So I think if we leave that access point specifically for if there's someone in need of accessibility, I think that'd be super important. And I think if somebody came to one of the other entrances and they needed the accessible mat, then we would kind of direct them to that way and accommodate them in that fashion.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments on the issue of accessibility on the beach? I would just share my views, Councillor Beattie. I think it's a terrific addition to specify that we need to have an accessible entrance to the beach. My preference is to just take out the word only so that staff can have a little bit of flexibility depending on the volume of people coming onto the beach. But I certainly think that having an accessible entrance is a very important addition to this motion. Yes, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Councillor Chorley, and to those who provided input to that, and also to in doing some quick reading over some notes. I was a bit naive to think that you can't even really test an accessible entrance. How do you determine or identify if someone has? I think it would prove difficult. So I'm in agreement to removing the word only. So thank you for that full consideration.
Great, and great, the clerk is just going to make that amendment so we can all see it. And I just wanted to raise a question about your suggested change number 8. Mr. Larmer, could you clarify whether a beach regulating bylaw will be necessary to implement this kind of management of the beach?
Through Chair to the members of council, I did quickly think about this, and then I just quickly sent a line to our solicitor. And when we get out of the realm of just opening and closing the beach, relying on provincial legislation like the Trespass Property Act, it is important to have a regulating bylaw and authority there to enforce through the provisions. The only question would have is regarding the enforcement of each provision, so physical distancing, time, hours of use. It's almost like an extension of the parks use bylaw, but a temporary one just for COVID regulations for a specified time. And council even can put in a provision within the bylaw regarding a temporary period and when it will be coming, up for review or actually repealed, apologize, from then on. So it would be important to draft something like that and have it passed by council.
Okay. I did wonder whether when an individual goes to book a beach pass and they have to agree to a list of basically terms, I was wondering whether some of that criteria could be included in those terms. But I know you haven't had time to fully investigate this with the town's legal team. Can you just put the wording up one more time? And I'm wondering if we should put some language in there that just says, if needed, that you can bring back to council.
Oh, sorry, looking at me. Yeah, I think that something that we can research and bring back to council. I think the only issue with that is that we wouldn't necessarily start the process unless directed to regarding this bylaw, which could delay it if that's what it's needed. If we have another solicitor opinion on it to go forward on that. Maybe draft the bylaw, bring it for approval as well as a solicitor opinion on that. I think we still have yet to talk about that, or council has debate regarding that provision regarding that permitting system, whether or not that'll work at all, but that's something that we can look at. Just because technically, I think we might run into the problem with those that are less advantageous with the internet, being able to book through an online portal and being able to read. Also, a lot of people, when they're doing this, sometimes they fly by it. I want to get on the beach, whether they've read that process and signed off on it. Bylaws are very succinct. They're almost like a regulatory law of the municipality. So they could be posted, it could be distributed, it can be right there in a bylaw number. There can be set fines if needed. So it allows a little bit more teeth for that purpose, as well as we can enforce it different than a waiver and agreement that we're not really seeing them agree to or sign off on. Additionally, there's a lot of individuals have different learning abilities too and understanding those legal parses. So you definitely wouldn't want someone to register for this beach to have to go to a lawyer and interpret a waiver that they're signing up for to use a public beach. So that's another thing we'll have to think about as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. That's very important considerations. Councillor Darling.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Chorley. Mr. Larmer just brought up the one issue I was going to bring up with the online. I'm not, again, for the reasons Mr. Larmer mentioned, I too feel that it's restrictive. I mean, when people want to go somewhere, they go, and if the venue's full, it's full, to book it online, to have people from out of town book online and then decide, well, I'm not going to go down. I'm not going to use the pass. So then it may restrict the amount of people that can come to the beach. So I'm thinking it's on, like we're saying, on a first come, first served basis. You pack up your family, you go down to the beach, you realize when you go that there's an occupant load of 500 people, and you get there at opening. If you're in line early and you get in, fine. If you don't, you try another day. So I would like to see the online process all removed out of it, and the amount of work that's involved for staff. Just if we can have, you walk up, the staff at the door says, here's the requirements, do you agree? And you give a verbal agreement and you go in, if we can do it. I mean, that's the way it's always operated. So I would like to see the online taken out if at all possible.
Okay, thank you for your feedback. If we can have a discussion on the issue of online, would that be okay if we just followed that thread for a minute? Did anyone have a comment specifically on the issues raised by Councillor Darling? Councillor Bureau, we haven't heard from you as yet.
Yeah, okay, couple things. With the online, that is a good way, except that not everybody is online or even will know about this online system. Second, if we do have a first come, first served basis and this gets out, then that means that we are going to have lineups going from, I wouldn't even know where they would start and end at the beginning. If say the beach can have 500 people and as social distancing, how would we monitor and line up people on a daily basis or a weekend basis and staff that? I'm like, to me, like, I understand where this is going and I think it's great. I just don't know how this could be implemented without a ton of staff and without a ton of marketing to let everybody know the exact procedures and rules and how to do this. There's downfalls in both ways with the online and with first come, first serve. Still on the fence on that. So that was just my opinion.
Thanks for your comments. Yeah. I did see Councillor Burkhart's hand. Councillor Burkhart, did you have a comment on the online issue?
Yeah, so I would say on the online issue, first, yeah, there's an accessible issue to anyone that doesn't have access to online, or as Councillor Bureau said, getting the information out to to individuals if they show up all of a sudden. I think you could probably do it feasibly on a first come, first served basis, whether it's a matter of you still have the time frames between this time, this time, this time. So maybe it moves people along so more people can utilize the beach throughout the day. So maybe it's not a full day event, as long as people have that disclaimer ahead of time before going in. As for, there's also costs associated with online booking services. And I don't know if that's going to be a feasible cost looking into that. It can get quite expensive, and just the scenario of how to deal with that. So even, for example, if individuals go in during the time, we have a count, and then when they leave, that adds capacity, and, just have times through the day that, yes, we need to go in, and if you're all for the cleaning of whatever surfaces there are, or just, I guess, moving people along so more individuals or families can enjoy the beach.
Thank you, Councillor Burkhardt. Any other questions? Councillor Darling, I see your hand, but first I'm going to just go to Deputy Mayor Seguin.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. I just wanted to ask Director Huswick a question. I know that for the last few years, the reservations for the marina, reservations for the campground have they done both online and phone? I'm just trying to get an answer to Councillor Burkhart's question on the costing and whether this software is something that we could utilize for the 2 months remaining for the beach. Whether or not it is as complicated as, I prefer. I mean, we do a lot of things online, and you're right, there are a lot of people that don't have access to that. But I really think we're to Councillor Bureau's question of, people lining up And in the hot sun, that may cause more problems than not. So if they have a set time, and I do recall on June 1st when the health unit did present, and they were sort of segmenting the beach. We don't know on our beach what is the capacity for social distancing. We need to know that first. And I really would like maybe a hybrid of both, but I think people coming to the beach, it's the same thing as our Honk mobile app that we all endorsed. That was to make things more efficient. That was to make things, that's all online. That's with a mobile phone. There's a lot of people that have those as well. I think we need to keep a portion of that in there so that people get to the beach and they know that they're going to get in for a couple of hours, 3-4 hours. And I think that's important. Otherwise, there'll be disgruntled beachgoers that will not be happy, and they'll have all their stuff in their wagons and everything else. So I think we need to, sort of direct staff, Mr. Huswick's department to, understand how other parts of the waterfront are managed, and maybe suggest how we can do that for the beach for the 2 months that we have.
Director Hustwick?
So I guess with the online, I think the campground and marina reservation systems are very customized. We could potentially utilize the software or ticket software for the concert hall. That has a built-in service fee, so we'd have to confirm with the supplier whether we could take that out in order to make it free, and how quickly that type of an adjustment could be made, and what would the impact of that be on future sales. So that's a possibility. There are other systems available. Ticketfly is one that I know has been used by other groups in town. I think that's been acquired by Eventbrite. So, I mean, we can certainly look at what's feasible in a very short period of time and the costs associated with it. I think one of the biggest expenses is going to be staffing. No matter what type of option you look at, we're going to need a lot of students hired to manage the access points. We'll also have to look at, people's ability to leave the beach once they're in, whether that's an option. People going into town for lunch, for example, leaving to use the porta potties, or whether we move the porta potties onto the beach to limit people leaving the beach area. I think no matter what you look at, there's likely going to be lineups of one type or another while we check. If it's first come, first serve, does everyone get a bracelet as they show up? That takes time. Even if they have a ticket, we have to check the tickets, make sure they're not fraudulent tickets. That's going to take time. So it's, I think, inevitable that there will be lineups. There will likely be people showing up not knowing about the ticketing, and there will be challenges in managing those types of situations where people might not be very happy. So there's a lot of different issues that we'll need to work through, and we'll need a lot of staff to manage that.
Okay. I did see Councillor Darling's hand. If we go back to Councillor Darling and then Councillor Bureau.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Just on a couple of the comments. One, people lining up in the sun. They're going to the beach for sun. They have umbrellas, whatnot. So lining up is not an issue that way. With lining up again, I've been up around Peterborough to Costco. There's nobody monitoring the lines. They're lined up right around the store. The social distancing thing is out there. People know if you get in line, you stay 2 meters apart. You don't need the little X's on the park or anything else. If we've got staff walking along, I mean, the line could zigzag through the park. People want to use a beach that has limited access, then there's going to be some inconvenience to it. It's either they want to use the beach or they don't. So if they have to line up, like the director says, there's a lot of issues. I think we should just leave it for staff to sort those issues out. We're not going to be able to deal with all the issues this evening. That's why I think when it comes to the operational end of thing, we have staff that are quite capable of making good, reasonable decisions. And we're not going to sort out every issue. So if we can give them a series of guidelines to work within, parameters to work within, and then I know staff will do the best they can do. Thank you.
Was it Councillor Bureau who was next?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Darling on this. We're going to need a staff report to come back to figure out how all this is going to be cost effective and how we can do it right. And the worst thing we want to do is make everybody mad and inconvenient when we're trying to help them and open things up. If it was my vote, I'd be in for the first come, first serve as well. I think that would be the ideal way to go if we're going to do it that way.
Okay, any other comments regarding online versus first come, first serve at the gate? No? Any other comments? I'll just share my comments. The reason why I suggested an online system was because my concern is about as we manage crowds on the beach, we need to think about scenarios that could increase the risk of COVID spreading. And in that regard, I really didn't want to see lineups into the gates. We wanted to, in my mind, I think we should try and avoid lineups as much as possible. And in particular, I'm thinking about the health and safety of the staff who are working the gate. The more interaction they have with the public at the gate, the greater the risk for those staff members. Now, I think some of the benefits of an online system is that it's much easier for town staff to manage the numbers that way. They can determine the appropriate number of passes, make those passes available online. If it's a first come, first serve, we're going to put our staff members in a very awkward position of using clickers or counters at the gate, trying to work out how many people are on the beach, how many have left. And then at some point, they will need to start turning people away. And I think that could spark confrontation and be very, very difficult for those staff members. If we limit the number of tickets up front, we make them available online. Our clerk has raised some important issues about accessibility for people who don't have access to the internet. I'm sure there are ways that we can mitigate those problems, whether it's a phone number that can be called and a Town of Cobourg employee can fill out the form online for someone. There are ways to do that. The other benefit of online is that we can push information out to visitors before they leave their homes. We can give them health screening questions from their home, as opposed to asking them a whole list of health screening questions at the gate. And if they say, yes, I have a cough, or yes, I have a fever, again, our staff will be in a very awkward position having to turn those individuals away for those reasons. We can also inform people saying, you cannot bring alcohol on the beach, you cannot bring your dog. We don't have food available at the canteen, so people know in advance that they need to bring food. And we can ask people to agree to certain terms, like you will need to take your garbage with you, and you will need to leave at the end of your time slot. So are there any other questions before we move on regarding online versus first come, first serve at the gate? Councillor Bureau?
Either way, unless there's going to be a big marketing plan, there's no way that we are going to get this word out to all the visitors out of everywhere, whether it be Northumberland or the GTA or anywhere else. Just like last weekend and the weekend before and every day, there has been visitors every day that did not know the beach was closed. So how are we going to be able to get that out there and have people understand this without a big marketing plan, which we already know from prior, we don't have the dollars for. So whether you have that confrontation or the people that do it right and go through, or you're going to have the people coming because they don't know. So how would it, either way, there's going to be a confrontation at the gate at some point.
Councillor Beattie?
Thank you very much, Councillor Chorley. And just hearing Councillor Burrow speak as well as fellow members, I'm hearing two different user experiences and two different scenarios that I think have to be addressed. There is something about the online platform. I am very much aware that what I'm about to say is probably a very general assumption, but hopefully a well-intentioned traveler or a local resident in this day and age is accessing public health or the community's main website or information about parks and beaches. I really do echo Councillor Chorley's comments about how this is an opportunity not only to engage with visitors and locals, but to push out essential information about points of access, the do's and don'ts on the beach. I wonder if there's nothing saying if a visitor comes to Cobourg and they find out they need an online pass, or they're able to call Cobourg and ask for a pass, that they could do so right then and there. And if there's still available passes on that day, then they can go forth into the beach. Innisfil and Barrie right now are doing, or Barrie for sure is doing, a pass-based system. Some people are turned away, but it's more informed people. And if at the time, again, passes are still available for that day, nothing saying that they can't go on their phone right then and there at the gate, order it, or call and get it. So I think there's a lot of public education, but in this day and age, not having that, for me, without an online system and a phone-in option for those that can't navigate online or don't have remote access, I don't know how we're really monitoring capacity while trying to mitigate risk for the staff that are going to be on the front line welcoming folks to the beach.
Thank you. Are there any other comments, Councillor Burkett?
So just a comment in regards to Councillor Burrow's educating the public and people coming from out of town. I did witness, it doesn't matter how much education or how much media or whatever you get out there, people still don't understand. I witnessed 5 individuals come to our beach this weekend, walk from the Esplanade down to the beach with their chairs, ready to go on the beach, to see the sign and finally say, oh, I guess it's closed, and walk back to their car. So it's going to happen regardless whether it's open, closed. People are still going to come because they're not going to the proper points of access to get that information. So you're never going to get that information across. So regardless of whether it's online, first come, first serve, we just need to do what's going to be best for everyone, or the vast majority.
Thank you for your comments.
We do have, Chair, just back, we do have like an amendment on the floor with 8 parts to it. So I'm not sure how you want to address those. Go each one, vote on them, and then go to original motion as amended, then talk about the main motion.
Right.
What do you think?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Larmer. We do have Councillor Beatty's amendment on the floor. I would just say regarding the discussion about online versus first come, first served at the gate, I think the intention and the focus is to provide limited and controlled access to the beach. It's not to facilitate tourism. It's really to allow this access to the beach in a way that's going to be safe, particularly for local residents with young children, for cooling centers, to be able to access the beach, and also to try and spread out some of the activity along our waterfront and make sure that we aren't creating hot spots with a complete and total closure as the situation changes and evolves for us through the summer. Now, going back to Councillor Beatty's amendments, if Mr. Larmer could put those up onto the screen.
Just you, Chair, I do have one question just regarding, I think Councillor Beatty put amendment on the floor regarding the timing. I hope that is correct. I didn't see it bolded, so I just want to make sure that that was.
If I may, Councillor Charlie?
Yes.
Yes. I believe I struck that out. Sorry, Mr. Larmer, I'm just looking at my Word document here. If you can just give me a moment. Correct. I had struck out such as a morning pass 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. and an afternoon pass from 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. and put in suggested operating hours of 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily based on earlier conversation from Council. However, I'm happy to remove the time frame, as to Councillor Darling's point, that can be assessed by staff, more importantly, to reflect what human resources are going to be able to be deployed to this.
Okay, thank you for that amendment. So just to repeat, it is with operating hours from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Is that
10 a.m.
correct?
to 6 p.m. Yeah, not 6 p.m. Yeah, the other way, Mr. Lammer. Thank you.
Okay. And so, yes, sorry, I can't see everyone's image at the moment. 1 second.
Just give me 1 second.
Councillor Darling has his hand up from what I can see. Councillor Turley, sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. Councillor Darling, you can go ahead.
Just have to unmute, Councillor Darling.
We'll just give Councillor Darling a chance to unmute.
My screen disappeared on me. I got zoomed. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, with the operating hours. I just wondered if we could leave it to staff to determine based on lifeguarding, and like there's one says operating hours on the time and the other one says Monday to Friday. The mayor's mentioned Monday to Sunday or all week. Why don't we just leave it open that tell staff if we have enough staff to operate on expanded hours, or we have to limit the hours, or we don't have enough lifeguards? I think those decisions need to be made by staff based on the availability of students and lifeguards.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Anyone else regarding opening hours? Councillor Bureau.
Generally, I do like those times, but I do think that if there's a way that we can add that in there for after 6 o'clock at night, people do like to walk on the beach. It's not crowded. I also think maybe in the morning, there's a time for walking on the beach. If we can keep those open for walkthroughs in the morning and at night only, and then if people are coming to sit at the, to want to sit on the beach and go swimming and stuff, we have what we're doing now. But I do think we should have the walkthrough in the morning and at night as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bureau. I would just remind you that any time that the gates are open, I think we will need to have staff present to monitor the situation. So if we extend the opening hours, it will have a significant impact on the cost of the operation. Councillor Burkett?
I think having during the week or weekends, whatever it is, I think you need to go past 6 o'clock, not just for walking in particular, but I would say for individuals, like for example, during the week that are working, that may want to go down in the evening when it's maybe a little cooler, whatever the case might be. So I think if we can staff it, you know, and leave this up to them, if we can staff it later into the evening, I think that would be appreciated by some that may be working during the day, kind of thing.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Councillor Burkett. Councillor Beattie, I'm just going to ask you if you wanted to inject your comments, and then we'll go to Director Hustwig.
I'm happy to remove the specific time frames, hearing that some staff analysis around that needs to be considered, and I'm assuming that will come back to council. So I'm happy to remove a detailed time bracket until we're able to get some further understanding from staff as to what those operating hours would look like.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Hustwig, did you have a comment that you wanted to share?
Yeah, just in terms of the hours, I think one of the things we'd be looking at is how best to manage those types of hours. So if we have to close at 6 o'clock on a warm, sunny evening with a lot of people on the beach, then we need the staff to actually vacate the entire beach and go around and try to remove people. it might be easier to have longer hours and let people leave on their own, according to their own schedules, rather than trying to move a large number of people out of a space that they're enjoying. Those are the types of things that we'll need to look at.
Right. So thank you, Director Hustwick, for sharing that. But I think those comments are relative. They're relevant in a scenario where it's a first come, first served, and people stay as long as they want and leave when they're ready to leave. In a scenario where we have specific times that you book and a beach pass with time limitations, hopefully there wouldn't be a need for staff to make that determination and try and clear out the beach. Again, that sounds problematic to me. Regarding the times, we can take a vote specifically on the times. I can just say that my preference is that council defines the times of the beach opening, because this is such an important issue to the community. But I agree we need to have staff input so that we can understand in terms of availability of lifeguards, what works for the staffing levels that we will have. I think we actually need a staff recommendation when staff have more time to make those assessments and bring it back to council. But my preference would be that council does define the opening times, because really the intent with this motion is to create a trial period. And if the trial runs smoothly, then council can make adjustments, ideally for slightly longer opening times if possible. I'm hoping that this can be a phased in approach that's done cautiously in the beginning and then gradually increased with a very public decision made through this council. So my proposal would be to, if Mr. Larmer could put the wording up, I'll have a look.
So I just want to, Councilor Charlie, I'm getting I think we, so there's a motion to amend on the floor with 9 parts from Councilor Beattie on the floor. So what I constitute this motion, just if I can, is an amendment with removing and deleting and adding wording. So I think it might be important to deal with those part of the amendment. If council doesn't agree to those specific and they want to pull them out, they should do that separately and then to discuss. What I think procedurally, which might be easier, if we go through these 9 amendments on this amendment, which has a number of them, if it's a bit contentious and there could be amendments to that, not everyone agrees and want to pull it out, I think what would be easier is if Councillor Beattie withdraws that from the amendment, and then once you get to the main motion, we separate those out for a vote on the amendment, which is the motion. Just make it easier if that is okay.
Would it be all right if we just quickly went through one by one and took a vote on each and just be quite simple and systematic about it?
So that would be easier, but procedurally, it wouldn't work because you'd have to have a motion to divide, which would be an amendment, and then you'd have to work out all of them because they're passing in one motion. I think there's been debate on several different amendments. So what's easier is that because this is an amendment with a number of different parts, is that you walk through them all and vote on it, or you'd have to make amendment to motion to divide and talk about them all separately. Sometimes it gets complicated when there's a number of different items with one motion, but I think the easier way is to go through these. If they're not a consensus, they can be pulled when they go back to the original motion. That makes sense.
Does that make sense to everyone? I'm just wondering if Councillor Beattie wanted to withdraw her entire amendment and then just bring forward one by one for a quick vote. Would that work?
If that's what I'm hearing is the most efficient way procedurally and of our time, I'm happy to do that. So just to make sure that I understand, sorry, one last time, is I'm going to remove the most effective way procedurally is to remove my notice to amend, go back to the original motion from Councillor Chorley. And then if I want to have certain items added, so really I'm going to be putting forward a few notices to amend.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
To support whatever is the most efficient process, I'm happy to withdraw.
Okay. As we're talking about opening hours, should we start there? Or should we start at number 1?
Let's start at the number 1 bullet, go one bullet at a time.
Okay.
Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to pull up the original one.
Mr. Larmer, is it possible to work from the one that we just discussed that Councillor Beattie had in front of us?
Of course. You want to put that one on the floor? Yeah. Sorry, I just have many screens open. I apologize. There we go. There you are.
Okay. So I think we can all see the amendment, number 1. Councillor Beattie, do you want to speak to this, or are we happy for me to just call the vote?
No, I think I had the opportunity to indicate my intentions with this, so you can call the vote. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm just going to get the screen where I can see everyone. Okay, so on amendment number 1, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor?
Oh, can you read it? Like you take it off the screen. What are you calling number 1? The fence?
Maybe Mr. Larmer, would you mind reading the amendment? Just read the sentence for us, please.
Yes, so the first one that moved by Councillor Beattie is the therefore be it resolved, which adds the wording that council confirms the closure of Victoria Beach to normal activity, but instructs staff to prepare for a trial system of a safe and gradual reopening with restricted access and limited capacity as follows. That's moved by Councillor Beattie.
Okay.
Great, now call the vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Burkett, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just in regards to your Zoom screen, if you want to see everyone on the side panel, you want to go to gallery view. When Mr. Larmer shares the screen, which is usually on your left-hand side, there's a bar that you can drag over by the little heads over to the center, which will give you more of the little panels with us on it so you can see everyone.
Great, thank you for that. I was struggling with that particular feature. So calling the vote on amendment number 1, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And it carries. Mr. Larmer, could you read amendment number 2, please?
Amendment number 2 put forward by Councillor Beattie is on point number 2. A limited number of beach passes for use. The amendment is by all members of the public, and that's moved by Councillor Beattie.
Okay, everyone's clear on the amendment. Councillor Darling.
Can we, that says on an online basis, are we going to add in on phoning in as well?
Can we come back to that maybe after we go through Councillor Beattie's
All right.
amendments? Yep, but certainly remind me if I forget to circle back to that issue. Okay, so calling the vote on amendment number 2, all in favor? Opposed? Oh, sorry, I'm going to call it again.
Order.
Yep.
I thought we were moving, we're keeping that one, we're moving on. We're coming back to that. Is that what we just said?
So what I was suggesting is that we just vote on Councillor Beattie's amendment number 2, and Councillor Darling raised the issue about online versus first come, first served at the gate. We will circle back to that issue and debate that separately after we deal with Councillor Beattie's amendments.
Okay.
Okay.
Just making sure I'm catching up.
Well, thank you for doing that. So I'll call the vote again on amendment 2. All in favor? Opposed? And it carries. Mr. Larmer, could you do number 3, please?
Yeah, so amendment number 3 is point number 3. The beach passes will only be valid for a specific date and time, being 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And that's moved by Councillor Beattie.
Okay. Councillor Beattie, did you want to alter your amendment, or are you happy with it as read by the clerk?
I'm actually going to remove that one to go back to an earlier comment, as I said, and listening to the full discussion, leaving that to after a staff analysis to indicate what those times would be.
I'm just going to give Mr. Larmer a chance to insert that so we can all see it.
So just for clarification, Chair, Councillor Beattie is removing her amendment on that section, and we're not replacing with any other wording. Councillor
Just
Beatty?
put as per staff recommendation.
So these are amendments to the main motion from Councillor Beatty, so she has to move that, and we're just dealing with her. There was 9 as part of what she wanted to bring forward. So it would be up to Councillor Beatty if she wants to withdraw that amendment or make that change. And then if we vote on all these, when we go back to the original motion, someone can bring that change if they wish.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Councillor Beatty, would you consider wording such as opening times to be determined by council after receiving a staff recommendation?
Yes, I appreciate the example still being there. I'm happy with that. So, and to Councillor Darling's point, so suggested wording would be, my apologies, I have to see words.
There you go.
I need to get more than one screen. I do apologize. The beach passes and an afternoon pass. The beach passes will only be valid for a specific date and time. And Councillor, as per staff recommendations following a report. No.
My suggestion was opening times to be determined by council after receiving a staff recommendation. I'm hoping maybe that's something that could come to the regular council meeting next week, and we could discuss and finalize those opening times then. That will give staff several days to do some investigations. Does that
I forgot the tube council. Yes, I agree with that wording.
Okay.
Want to say that again? Put it in there.
And I believe that's to replace, is that to replace such as morning and afternoon pass, that section?
Yes, please.
So Mr. Larmer, it's opening times to be determined by council after receiving a staff recommendation. But Mr. Larmer, can you please keep the line, the beach passes, that begins the beach passes, and just replace where it begins such as a morning pass?
Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
I'm gonna redo this. Okay, so we're getting rid of that. Can you say it again? Sorry, Councillor Chorley.
Sure. Opening times to be determined by council after receiving a staff recommendation. But it should go in after that line.
Okay. Can you point me in the right direction now? I apologize.
That's my gal was 15 time opening times. Okay, good.
For council consideration, is that okay?
Yeah, so question, Mr. Larmer, do we need a full staff report or can a verbal recommendation come to council?
I think that would be up to maybe the CAO or community services how they could get that forward. I'm not sure. I'd have to resort to the interim CAO on that.
Mr. Davey, could you comment? And I'll get to you, Councillor Bureau, in just a second.
Well, I think my preference would be that there's a staff report just so that it's there's a written record of what the staff recommendation is.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bureau?
I would also, if it's coming back for a report, I would also like to have in there, if possible, times of walkthrough as well in the morning and at night, not just the times of operation of the beach.
Can I suggest that you make an amendment to the amendment if that's what you'd like to suggest?
I would like to suggest that I'd make the amendment to the amendment to add walkthrough times as well in the staff report. I don't have the wording in front of me, so I can't rewrite it quickly, but.
While Mr. Larmer pulls up the wording, Councillor Beattie, would you like to share your comment?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Turley. Through you too, Councillor Bureau, I appreciate the emphasis on the walkthrough access. I'm just wondering for, because a staff report will be coming back, possibly maybe a question to address Director Hustwick. Can we assume or indicate that operating hours and use also includes walkthrough?
Madam Chair, to Councillor Beattie, I guess we'll have to consider that in terms of how it would actually operate, because you know, then it becomes an enforcement issue. It might be easier in the morning to somehow allow people that don't have passes to walk through, but then you'd have to remove them before it opens up for pass holders. The end of the day, you'd have to remove everybody and then open it up again for people that want to walk through, and then enforce it that people are only walking through. I'm really concerned with that type of model in terms of how we would actually operationalize it and manage it.
Okay, thank you, Director Hustwick. Councillor Bureau, would you still like to make an amendment to the amendment?
I would, thank you. So to add walkthroughs in there, however that can be worded. Or even in the evening at any time, whether it be if the beach is open till 6. Like, I don't even know how this would work. So if the time ended at 6, then would all the gates be closed and everybody be ushered off the beach? Is that the idea of how it would go, and then the gates would be locked and we're done?
Yep.
I would still like to see some walk, if there is possible. I mean,
how are we going to police that?
Yeah, sorry, just 1 second. Councillor Bureau, can I just suggest that maybe we circle back to that issue, because it really changes the whole approach of having a booked time slot. And I'm just wondering if it would be better if you work on your wording that you would like to see added, and maybe we just simply move forward with Councillor Beattie's amendment. We take a vote on that and then revisit later in the discussion the change that you would like to see added. Would that be easier and clearer for members of council?
We can.
Yes. Is that all right with you, Councillor Bureau?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, so Mr. Larmer, could you please read Councillor Beattie's amendment one more time, and then we'll call the vote.
Yes, so amendment from Councillor Beattie on the original motion number 3, that beach passes will be only valid for specific date and time, opening times to be determined by council after receiving a staff report for council consideration.
Right. And hopefully that report can come to council, ideally for next week's regular council meeting. Okay, we'll call the vote on this amendment. All in favor? Opposed? And it carries. I think we're on to Councillor Beattie's amendment 4 now. Mr. Larmer, could you read that, please?
So amendment number 4 from Councillor Beattie. Access gates will be managed by summer staff or a security company who will be responsible for checking pre-booked online passes. It's moved by Councillor Beattie.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Beattie?
If possible, I'd like to omit the word online, just pre-booked beach passes, in case the assumption that it might be phone or online. So I think online is redundant. If you're okay with that.
All right, Mr. Larmer's made that change. Are there any other questions or comments before we call the vote?
Sorry.
Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment? Opposed, if any? And it carries. Okay, I think we're on to Amendment 5, please, Mr. Larmer.
So Amendment 5, moved by Councillor Beattie, amendment to the main motion, is a total deletion of the wording on the last point on page 1. Given the reduced number of individuals permitted on the beach, lifeguards will not be deployed and beach pass applicants must agree to use the beach at their own risk. And so that's that deletion. And the second one is the amendment number 6. The appropriate number of lifeguards will be hired for the rest of the summer season to reflect operating hours. Just to clarify, chairs, are you adding wording and then adding, deleting wording and then adding, or are these two separate motions of amendment, Councillor Beattie?
Right, through you, Chair, to the clerk. I suppose it's maybe one or the other. It's the deletion and then replacing it with, so I guess replacing given the reduced number of.
Right, so it's add and delete. Delete and add, I apologize. There you go, Chair.
Great, thank you. Are there any comments on this amendment? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the vote. Oh, Councillor Beattie, your screen's gone blank. I'm just wondering if you're there before we call the vote. I think we should just wait 1 second. Councillor Beattie, are you able to hear us?
Hey, how you doing? You're just coming right back in.
Okay.
Just coming back in.
Councillor Beattie, can you hear us? Okay. Councillor Beattie, you can hear us okay now?
I can. I'm terribly sorry about that. I'm not quite sure where we left off, so my apologies.
No problem. You haven't missed anything. We've just held the vote until you could come back in and join us. So we are voting on amendment number 5. It's regarding lifeguards. Yes? Okay. All right. I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And it carries. Okay. On to number 6. Mr. Lambert, please.
Yes, so amendment number 6, moved by Councillor Beattie, is the accessible beach mat will be installed with one entry gate being an accessible entrance. Moved by Councillor Beattie.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments before we call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And it's carried. And on to number 7.
Amendment number 7, moved by Councillor Beattie on the main motion, is the last point, which reads, beach passes will be made available on a trial basis on weekdays only, Monday to Friday. The addition is, and will close on holidays that fall on a weekday, beginning on July 6, 2020, unless council deems otherwise due to a change of circumstance. Moved by Councillor Beattie.
Okay, so the addition here is that the beach will close on any holiday that falls on a weekday. Okay, Councillor Beattie.
My apologies, and I thank you, the clerk, for walking us through this to make sure. I'd actually like to remove that altogether, because after hearing the majority of the consensus, I believe from council, was a 7-day option seemed to be preferred. So I will remove that particular amendment, please.
So the amendment's been withdrawn.
Okay.
Now we're on amendment number 7, the new 7, moved by Councillor Beattie, and further that a staff draft Further, that staff draft a beach regulating bylaw for council's approval at the June 29th regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Beattie, amendment to the original motion.
Okay, thank you. And if there aren't any other questions, Mr. Larmer, is this feasible, the timeline for you?
Yeah, and I think through chair to member council, we can get a quick legal on the two different scenarios and write that in that report that's coming anyways as part of that. If the CEO thinks that that will work, and I think we could have a draft regulating bylaw put place with some of these restrictions and some other staff discussions that we have prior to the 29th, but I don't think the bylaw would be a factor. The only issues though, if council decides to put in set fines as a schedule to this bylaw for enforcement by enforcement officers, the police, it would take at least, as stipulated in the report, about 3 weeks turnaround to be approved by the senior regional justice. The only thing with set fines is that under the POA, we have the ability to have set fines on each provision that is a regulating section of a bylaw. If we don't and we choose to enforce the provisions, what we have to do is go through a Part 3 scenario of the Provincial Offences Act, meaning that there's a lot more costs associated with it because it puts it into a 6 month, without getting too depth in the detail of the POA system, a 6 month process regarding the issuing of a fine, then appearing before a justice of the peace on a summons of information. So in some ways, it's a lot more legal work related to that than just creating set fines and making them go under a Part 1 offense, the Provincial Offences Act, which has a bit different parameters regarding the courts of justice.
Okay, thank you. That's valuable information. Are there any other comments? Mayor Henderson?
Thank you through you, Madam Chair, Councillor Chorley, to you or to Brent Larmer. The one aspect that's not been added, I just like to put it out there for dialogue perhaps, is when we move to this system, which is great, but when we get X number of people, my concern is access to washrooms. So are we tonight going to put anything about whether we ask staff to come back with a report regarding either portable or opening up our current washroom base based on contract? Because the idea is that when we move to this system and have X number of people on our beach, they're certainly going to require some degree of facilities because I don't think you can have one without the other. So I just wondered if that's being entertained by you as chair or by Councillor Beattie through her amendments.
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. That is definitely an important consideration. I would just suggest that we vote on this amendment regarding bringing back the draft bylaw to council next week. And then I've got that on my list of issues that we can circle back to and certainly have a discussion after we deal with Councillor Beattie's amendment. Is that all right with you?
By all means.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments on Councillor Beattie's amendment regarding a draft bylaw? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And it's carried. Do we have any more, Mr. Larmer?
No, Madam Chair, I think that's it, but I believe Councillor Beattie has her hand up.
I apologize. I'm going to pause for a little bit. I just looking in what we've gone through, although I admitted the holiday reference on the weekdays, I'm happy to make it unless another councillor wanted to. As of right now, the trial basis stands for weekdays only. I'm happy to make one final notice to amend. Instead of weekdays, it's from Monday to Sunday, every day of the week. I know other councillors brought that up as a preference, so I mean, I'm happy to add that as a final motion. Otherwise, if another councillor who brought that up wants to make that notice to amend, I didn't want council to lose sight of right now the trial basis says on weekdays only.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Beattie. That's perfect timing because that's next on my list of issues to circle back to. So let's go with that suggested amendment. Mayor Henderson, you spoke to this earlier in our discussion. Do you have any additional comments, or do any other members have comments on whether this should be weekdays for a trial period, or should we extend it 7 days a week?
Thank you for allowing me to speak to this. I was pressing for every day of the week. And the reason being, we've had a very interesting time with COVID. Out of normal circumstances, we've lost almost a month at this point through no one's fault. Time we implement this, we're going to certainly be at the end of June, if not July, and the summer is well before. So I thought personally, if it's great weather and people have an opportunity to come to Cobourg, be on our beach, then let that happen. So that was my rationale, because again, I don't see this as being a typical spring, summer season.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Are there any other comments on the issue of how many days this trial should cover? No? Councillor Darling.
Thank you. Just I'm for the 7 days, but just on the bullet it says weekdays only there. I think we got to remove that from it.
Okay.
Waiting for someone to remove that amendment, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Beatty, I think you're going to speak to that.
Sure. Following the mayor's and Councillor Darling's comments, observations, I'm happy to make a notice to amend that beach passes will be made available on a trial basis 7 days a week.
Okay, thank you. I'm just giving the clerk a minute to type that in.
Okay.
Yes, so this would be amendment number 8, moved by Councillor Beatty. Beach passes will be made available on a trial basis 7 days a week, Monday to Sunday, beginning on July 6, 2020. I have to amend that. No, we don't. Beginning on July 6, 2020, unless council deems otherwise due to a change of circumstance.
Okay. Okay, did everyone understand that? All right, my personal view, I would prefer a slower phased-in trial. So my preference is still for just weekdays, and if that goes well, then council could certainly expand it to 7 days a week. So I understand the point of view that Mayor Henderson's brought forward. I'm just a little bit more cautious. If there aren't any other comments, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? And it carries. Okay, are there any other amendments? I think we've gone through all of Councillor Beatty's. Mayor Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councillor Charlie. I know at the end you asked for a review on July 20th, and I understand why, because it's the first major committee of the whole meeting or regular in July. I understand that. Would you give any consideration of moving that to our August meeting? And I know that's a much later period, because I think when I look, it's August 24th. But part of my rationale is by the time we get this, it comes to council, we do the bylaw, we put it in. We want to give this some opportunity if it's really working. And with the caveat, if it's not working, we hear that back through Mr. Larmer or the emergency control group, then I can assure you I'd be more than willing, if need be, to call a special council meeting just on this fact. But I'm just wondering if that's too short of a time to get a really good read of what's happening by the time we get all the moving parts working. So I just put that out for your or other council's consideration.
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. Admittedly, the timelines are a little bit tight. It really only gives a 2-week trial before council considers how the trial is going on July the 20th. So your suggestion was to change the date to August. Mr. Larmer, you could probably pull the date up quicker than I can. The committee, the whole meeting in August, please.
August 24th.
August 24th. Before I agree to make that change, I'm just wondering if other members of council have anything they'd like to add on that issue. No comments on when council reviews the trial. Okay, so I think the best thing, Mayor Henderson, if you're willing to move an amendment for that.
Same wording, Council Chorley, that it would be August the 24th as opposed to July 20th, with the inherent understanding if we had any kind of concern or major issues, then I can assure you as mayor, I'd be willing to call with Mr. Larmer, certainly a special council meeting to address if there were any outstanding issues. I just wanted some time that we could get a lay of the land and give staff a chance to get in rhythm.
Okay, thank you very much for the amendment. So the amendment on the floor is to change that review date from July 20th to August 24th. Okay, any comments or questions from council before we call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And it carries. Okay, I have a few items on my list. Councillor Burkett, did you want to raise an issue and then we can circle back to the items on my list?
Yes, just in regards to, I know there's a lot of organizations, whether it's organized sports or groups that use the beach throughout the summer. Have staff been looking into, or if there's been discussions going on with those particular groups on potentially when, if and when the beach open, that they would be able to resume or have the beach rentals from us?
Director Hustwick, can you address the issue of whether some of the community groups who use the beach have been part of your conversations?
Madam Chair, to Councillor Burkett, my understanding is all beach events have been cancelled along with all other community events. With the startup of facilities, we've asked groups to submit back to play plans, and I mean, the one for the beach obviously would be volleyball. As far as I can recall, that they had canceled for the season, and we haven't, I don't believe we've heard anything back from them. So we certainly haven't received anything recent in terms of back to play proposal from any organized groups for the beach, nor would I suggest in this environment with trying to limit the number of people on the beach, would we want any type of organized sporting events.
Okay, thank you, Director Hustwick. The next issue I have on my list is the issue of washrooms raised by Mayor Henderson. We haven't included washrooms in this motion so far. The reason I didn't include it in the motion is because in our motion from June the 1st, Councillor Beattie put in an amendment asking staff to ensure that an appropriate number of washrooms are deployed in Victoria Park. Are there any suggested amendments? But before doing that, Director Hustwick, did you want to comment on the washroom situation?
Just to make it easy, I'll make sure we cover that off in the staff report for next week. That'll obviously be an important focus that we'll need to address. So we don't need a motion. We'll ensure to incorporate that in the report.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I know that the issue of whether the washrooms are outside of the gated area or inside of the gated area, and if we have beach passes, how that would work with people going through the gate to use the washrooms. I think council would really appreciate your feedback on that issue. The next one on my list was Councillor Bureau. You raised the issue about walk-through access. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just was wondering if we could add that into the staff report as well, whether it's feasible, not feasible, but if it could be an option. We're going over everything anyway, so.
Director Hustwick, would it be possible to include some information on options for walk-through access?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Councillor Bureau, are you satisfied with that?
Very, thank you.
Great. I think the only other issue I have on my list was the one raised by Councillor Darling regarding online versus first come, first served at the gate. Councillor Darling, did you want to put forward any amendment on that?
No, I'm comfortable with the online. I'm just concerned that those that don't have access. But if staff can actually include that in the report, that they can have a phone number that's available the previous day, or that day, then the hours of that phone number, so people understand, if they can't book at 10 o'clock at night for the next day, that, it's only during business hours or something like that, then I'm happy to wait till the staff report comes out with that issue.
Okay, thank you. Director Hustvik, Mr. Larmer, is that something that can be included in the report for next week? Some information? Yep. Okay, terrific. That's everything that I have on my list. Are there any other issues that council would like to raise before we call the vote, and maybe read over the entire motion one more time? Councillor Darling?
Yes, I'd just like to see every item on the amended motion put for us before the final vote.
Agreed. Mr. Larmer, would it be possible to put up our amended motion so that we can call the vote on this entire motion?
Yes. I think I've noted everything.
Okay. I'm just wondering if we should read it through just so people who are listening at home can hear all of the changes. Can I give that role to you, Mr. Larmer, as it's in front of you?
Sure, no problem. So, due chair to the members of council, I'll read the motion as amended and put forward by council. So this is moved by Councillor Chorley. Whereas on June 1st, 2020, council approved the closure of Victoria Park Beach and requested a staff report with options for how the town could reopen the beach with restricted use. And whereas the municipality has since been authorized to move to stage 2 in Ontario government's reopening plan, which came into effect on June 12th, 2020. And whereas all 19 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Northumberland County have been deemed resolved by the HKPR District Health Unit as of June 22nd, 2020. And whereas protecting the health and well-being of Cobourg residents is a key objective of the town's strategic plan and emergency response to the pandemic. Therefore, be resolved that council confirms the closure of Victoria Beach to normal activity, but instructs staff to prepare for a trial system of a safe and gradual reopening with restricted access and limited capacity as follows. The fence around Victoria Park Beach will remain in place with gated access points. A limited number of beach passes for use by all members of the public during designated hours will be made available free of charge and on a first-come, first basis via an online booking system. The beach passes will only be valid for a specific date and time. Opening times to be determined by council after receiving a staff report for council's consideration. Access gates will be managed by summer staff or a security company who will be responsible for checking pre-booked beach passes. A changeover period between time slots will allow for a smooth transition and rigorous sanitizing of hard surfaces. The number of beach passes made available will be determined based on physical distancing requirements and in consultation with the town's emergency planner and the HKPR District Health Unit. Outside of council-approved hours for use of beach passes, public access to the beach will be strictly prohibited. The appropriate number of lifeguards will be hired for the rest of the summer season to reflect operating hours. Beach pass applicants must also answer health screening questions and agree to abide by physical distancing rules and provincial emergency orders. The accessible beach mat will be installed with one entry gate being accessible entrance. Beach passes will be made available on a trial basis 7 days a week, Monday to Sunday, beginning on July 6, 2020, unless council deems otherwise due to a change of circumstances. And further that, staff draft a beach regulating bylaw for council's approval at the June 29th regular council meeting. And further that, the Town of Cobourg continues to communicate that Victoria Park Beach is closed except for those with a valid pass. And further, that the implementation of this trial period be reviewed by council at the Committee of the Whole meeting on August 24th, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Larmer, for reading that motion. I think we're ready to call the vote. Councillor Darling?
Yes, if I may, Mr. Lambert will put it back up. The one bullet that says, beach pass, where it's going to split into, I think it's on the next page up. That's just trying to find it. They're not numbered, so I couldn't remember the number. The one that says for cleaning.
Sanitizing.
Yeah, well, right there, number 5, a changeover period between time slots. Will that be determined by staff determining the times of opening, whether there will be time slots or whether it will be open 11 to 6 or 10 to 6 or 11 to 8? Or should we remove that line altogether?
Thank you, Councillor Darling. That's a good question. Just to explain, my intention with this was that we would have fixed time slots so that you aren't trying to find a family on the beach and say your time is up. Everyone would clear the beach when those time slots have finished, and then the next lot of people could come onto the beach. That would make it a lot easier for staff. And then the idea is that that turnover period would allow for some additional cleaning and sanitizing. I hope that helps to clarify.
Okay, I guess I'll wait till the staff report comes out whether that's feasible or not. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, is that something, Mr. Hustwick, that you can speak to in the report coming to council next week?
Yes, we certainly will. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other issues before we call the vote on the entire motion? Mayor Henderson?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. The only question I had at the very beginning, it talked about access points, which I'm fully agreeable to. I just want to be clear that will that also serve as our emergency access points as well? Because remember previously, we had 3 emergency access routes previously. And I'm just wondering, I'm just asking, are they one and the same, or we're going to leave that to staff to determine?
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. That is definitely an important question. Mr. Hustwick, would it be possible to add that to your list? Is that something you can speak to in the report coming to council next week?
Yes, we'll certainly be discussing that with emergency services, and we would likely have some additional emergency access spots identified in addition to those that are being used. So we would ensure there's more than adequate coverage, and we'll include that in the report.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments before we call the vote on the whole motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And it carries. And I just want to say a word of thanks to all of my colleagues. That was a tremendous effort to get this very, very important motion right. And thank you to senior staff for your valuable input. So that moves us to item 2 on the agenda.
If I may, point of order.
I was thinking the same thing. Councillor Darling, go ahead. I think I know what you're going to say.
I'd like to move a 3-minute break to get a glass of water and use the facilities.
Can I suggest it's a 5-minute break?
Sure, I'm good with 5.
Okay. Do we need to call the vote on that, Mr. Lambert?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. All in favor? And it carries.
Mr. Larmer, when we take a break like that, are we off or are we still on camera now?
Still on camera.
Okay, thank you.
I'm back, Brent. I just can't unmute. I can't start my own video. Okay.
Chair Chorley, it looks like everyone's here for council.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Larmer. So we're ready to resume, and the next item is under Parks and Recreation Services, item 2, memo from the Director of Community Services regarding the awarding of the East Pier Design and Engineering Request for Proposal, CO-20-06 The action recommended that Council award the East Pier Design and Engineering Request for Proposal contract to MBTW Group in the amount of $189,895 plus HST to provide design, engineering, and other professional services for the repair and enhancement of the East Pier. Are there any questions or concerns or comments from members of council? Okay, Councillor Darling?
I'm just wondering if this is so approved this evening, is there a timeline as to when it can be expected, the report can be expected?
Director Huswick, could you address that question, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. I have a preliminary meeting set up with the proposed successful proponent for Thursday to discuss a revised timeline. So we're about approximately 2 months past what would ordinarily have been a fairly quick turnaround in the RFP. So based on that, the whole timeline is likely to be shifted out about 2 months. But again, there's a lot of variables that will be involved in those discussions. Some of it might speed up, and there's a lot of impending discussions through this process about environmental assessments and other agency reviews and approvals that may go very quickly or could take a longer period of time. So we always try to build in a reasonable timeline, but it'll take time before we're able to really assess that. But I expect our goal will still be able to bring back hopefully some preliminary costing for budget deliberations in the fall, so that council will have at least a sense of what we might be facing in 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Hustwick.
Yeah, Director Hustwick, I just have one follow-up question. Council passed a motion that we would be receiving designs by September 2020. Is that definitely not going to be possible? And can we expect those perhaps 2 months afterwards? Is that what you are anticipating?
So that absolutely will not be possible now. So there was two main reasons for the delay. One obviously is the pandemic and the impact that that has had on the whole organization and resourcing and priorities. But also we've spent a lot of time looking at and assessing heritage cultural requirements related to this project. Some issues that were raised by the proponents, and we've had subsequent discussions with provincial government and internally within divisions to determine the best approach in order to address those in a way that will make hopefully the environmental assessment process go much smoother. So that took a little extra time that we hadn't initially anticipated, but we're back on track. And again, I'll have a better sense after the initial discussion with the consultants on Thursday in terms of what the timeline might be looking like.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Burkett.
So in regards to the timeline, once we approve this and the proposals come back, Director, this is to the Director, do you believe that we will be able to get this pier project completed within this council term?
Through Madam Chair to Councillor Burkett, the original estimate, and again, everything changes, especially when you're dealing with pretty much a 200-year-old structure. The original estimate was about a 4-month construction period. And again, we'll refine that through this design and engineering process. But we had originally anticipated that we would not necessarily want to be in construction during the peak summer season. So we had looked at originally looking to issue the tender documents for construction in approximately February of 2021, which would take a couple months. So that would take to April, May. If we were lucky, we might get a little construction time in next spring, but that was probably being optimistic. So realistically, we're looking at a construction period in the fall of 2021, and this delay won't impact that at all. We'll have should have plenty of time next year to issue the tender documents, assuming council approves the capital expenses, to be ready for construction in late summer or early fall. And we could probably start earlier than expected. The busy tourism season usually starts to slow down by mid-August, and we could be looking at starting in August instead of September. But again, we also don't know the implications of COVID-19 and how that's going to affect the whole situation next year. That's likely going to have an impact on the public engagement steps within this project. So we'll be having to use some unique approaches, most likely.
Thank you, Director Hustwig. Are there any other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Seguin.
Just one to the director. I'm assuming you haven't heard yet, but I know this was a grant application made to the provincial government, and given everything that they've been spending money on, have you heard one way or the other whether the town was or is still being considered for this grant application on the pier?
Well, to the Deputy Mayor, we haven't heard yet. I think the last I heard not long ago was that the province may have forwarded recommendations to the federal government, but that hasn't been confirmed. Originally, the province was going to, I believe, share with the applicants their decisions on recommending projects that would go to the federal government. We would have known that, and then the federal government would have then gone through their vetting process. But that wasn't exactly clear, and so the short answer is we haven't heard anything at this point.
All right. Any other questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Burkett.
Just a comment. I just want to say to council, I know that during the election that this was probably one of the larger issues is individuals wanting us to get this pier fixed. And I do hope that through this process, we can get this thing rolling. I know there's obviously some impact due to COVID, but I hope we can get through this process and hopefully start getting this thing fixed so people can start using it. And I know, I'm sure a lot of us have heard a lot of comments about it. So I look forward to this.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Burkett. Likewise, I consider this a high priority project for the town, and anything that staff can do to help move this process forward would be greatly appreciated. I know it's challenging circumstances. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And it's carried. So that moves us to item 3. Notice of motion, Councillor Emily Chorley and Councillor Adam Bureau regarding an equity and inclusion policy. The action recommended, whereas the Black Lives Matter movement has highlighted the need for a reaffirmed commitment to confronting racism and removing systemic barriers to equality, and whereas fostering an inclusive and welcoming community is a key tenet of the Town of Cobourg's annual Pride Month, and whereas municipal government can play a leading role in helping to achieve gender equality. Therefore, be it resolved that Council instructs staff to draft an equity and inclusion policy, and further that the policy specifically addresses the inclusion of Indigenous peoples, women, racialized or visible minority groups, people with disabilities, newcomers to Canada, and LGBT communities. And further that the policy draws upon resources such as Advancing Equity and Inclusion, a guide for municipalities, and FCM's Diverse Voices Toolkit. And further that the policy includes annual commitments to equity and inclusion training for Town of Cobourg staff and volunteers, engagement of citizens and advisory committees, and communications on progress. And further that the draft policy be presented to Council for consideration by October 26th, 2020. I can just take oh, sure. Councillor Beattie, would you like to make a comment?
I have a slight motion to amend, so I was quick with my hand, but you had a comment to make, so I'll wait until your opening remarks.
Okay. I'll keep my remarks very brief. I know this meeting has run quite long. The reason for bringing this forward, quite simply, is that it's 2020 and we don't have a policy like this. And I think during these times, it's especially important that we continue to be proactive in removing any barriers to Indigenous peoples, women, those with disabilities, newcomers to Canada, visible minorities, and the LGBTQ community here in Cobourg. The aim is twofold. It's really to improve and enhance the internal working environment for Town of Cobourg employees, as well as to enhance services provided by the town to the community. I would just say on a personal note, as a woman of mixed race, it's particularly important, I think. I understand what it's like to be a minority in the community, but I'm so proud that this is a tremendously welcoming community. That's certainly been my experience. And I think we've got an opportunity to enshrine that in the policies and practices of the town, that those principles of inclusion and equity. I just want to hand the floor to Councillor Bureau in case he has any comments he would like to contribute.
I do, actually. I'm very, very happy that Councillor Turley agreed to or wanted to do this with myself. I did go and talk with Ashley Bowman, who's the president of PFLAG Cobourg, and she wrote a little something that I'd like to read, if that's okay. She said, I'm proud of Councillor Turley and Councillor Bureau for putting forth a notice of motion by way of equality and inclusion policy that is reaffirming the Town of Cobourg's commitment to conforming racism, removing systematic barriers of equality. This is a powerful show of solidarity in this time of fighting for equality that is taking place all over the world. It is truly inspiring to see the amount of change that the Black Lives Matter rallies have inspired our community in a few short weeks. This, along with the progression of our Pride events over the past several years, are important human rights movements to have in smaller rural communities. They are a visual representation and a powerful education tool that can inspire positive change in our society. As we can see from this example, our current council has taken great strides in advancing equity and inclusion in Cobourg and is setting a prime example for other small municipalities in Northumberland. So I just thought I would share that with everybody.
Thank you so much, Councillor Bureau, and thank you to Ashley Bowman for sharing those words with us. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you to both yourself and Councillor Bureau for bringing this forward, and definitely echo a lot of your sentiments. If I may, I do have my apologies, late night, motion to amend just with some suggested edits and one addition. I did forward it to the clerk if you could bring it up on the screen. And again, to help with the conversation, I've just highlighted the additions to the motion. Councillor Turley, to you, I can read the motion as a whole, or I can just speak to the highlighted parts. If you can give me direction on how you'd like me to present the notice of motion.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. I would suggest that you walk us through your suggested changes.
Great, thank you. So just moving through the first paragraph and further that paragraph with the highlighted, in speaking to some Black people and people of color in our community, I was asking about with the Black Lives Matter movement and what is the appropriate language or recognition to be using, and just including Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And then I did the same as well as I reached out to the Cobourg Queer Collective and showed them this motion, and they too were very thankful for this. And one suggestion was replacing the LGBTQ with 2SL GBTQIAP+. This is an inclusive acronym of their community, and then other visible minorities. Further along and further that, I appreciated all the various groups being acknowledged for training, but I noticed that members of council were not included in that training. And so I think it's important that we ourselves receive a similar, if not more thorough training that staff, volunteers, and advisory committees would. And this last part, and I know before councillors and staff both think another committee, or maybe it's a working group, but I've chosen an ad hoc committee. And further, that council directs staff to form an ad hoc committee consisting of citizen members from these diverse minority populations, as stated above, in order to provide input on the development of the equity and inclusion policy. And the reason why I did that is I just want to make sure that this is a policy that our minority populations in the town of Cobourg see themselves in. I don't want us to get into the trap of passing on privilege to privilege and then back to council without these voices of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color, women, people with disabilities, newcomers to Canada, and members from the two LGBTIQIAP+ communities. And so that's the rationale for an ad hoc committee, or whether it's a quick working group of representation of our minority populations. Again, I think it's really important that this part of our population see themselves in this policy. And then with that in mind, if the ad hoc committee or a working group was approved by council tonight, I just pushed the deadline back to council for the first committee of the whole in December, and that's only to allow a few extra weeks if we were to work with a working group or an ad hoc committee. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. I think those are really great suggestions. I just would like to ask Mr. Larmer, with that timeline, does that work for you?
December 7th, is that what you're relating to, the last section of that amendment? Yeah, I think it would work for us. I think there's another timeline, though, that we have to consider, and that's regarding the presenting of that ad hoc committee terms of reference for that, and how many members we're going to have on that, and what staff we'd like to include in that purpose. So I think maybe we might need to add that as well to bring forward and start that process working, also taking into effect that the actual final deadline would be December 7th.
Thank you for that input. Councillor Beattie?
I'm happy to add that into the motion to amend, if I may, through you, Madam Chair, to the clerk. Mr. Larmer suggested time frame, and thank you, I didn't take that into consideration, a suggested time frame that it would take to achieve that deliverable.
Through Chair and Member Council, I would say for the terms of reference, we could probably get something to council. I'm going to say August 24th, committee of the whole meeting. The reason I'm going to say that is because there also have to be time allotted for the recruitment of committee members, which probably based on this report and decision of council and ratification next council meeting, there'll probably be submissions already to us for this committee. So that won't be, I don't think, as difficult to get members to sit on it, which is great. So that would factor in. Also gives me time for our deputy clerk, records management coordinator, to come in and take this on. One of the projects, if that happens, is the first term of reference for that to council. So what I think we also would put in that terms of reference is the meeting times. I think this meeting, this group, just like what we did with the Poet Laureate ad hoc committee and some of those other ones, that they can meet as a need basis. So they have one meeting, they schedule the next, and they put that notice out to the public to try to get it done for that December 7th. I think ultimately, once that term of reference is done, we have members going to the committee. We'll have to consider council member representation on that as well. I think it would be the committee's deadline on that fact to get something to December 7th meeting.
Mr. Larmer, I'm just wondering, Councillor Beattie, I think it's a good suggestion and very important that we have input from the communities that we are addressing in this policy. I just wanted to ask about other options. It's a very formal way to form an ad hoc committee. Mr. Larmer, have you thought about ways that you might consult those communities in a less formal way? Or do you think that an ad hoc committee would be advisable in forming this policy?
Through you, Chair, I think I've had a full 5 minutes to kind of think about this. So I think I might need a little bit more time to think of different avenues that we could go forward on. Maybe a simple, in the actual resolution, you've directed some different guidelines and different sources that we can start at a municipal level regarding this, and there's some best practices out there as well too. So maybe it's something that I could speak to communications regarding the bang the table, which would get a wide variety of members submitting comments or suggestions or different things in. And then, you know, I'm just not sure. Sometimes reading around the table, putting out ideas and drafting something sometimes work as well. I'm not sure. I'd have to consider a lot of options. And I would want to do that a little more thoroughly than make that kind of call tonight.
Councillor Beattie?
Oh, you can hear me go up. Hearing that, I have a suggested edit to that paragraph then, if I may, Madam Chair.
Certainly.
Just to move this forward, but also to be cognizant of the clerk's comments. So my suggestion is that in the paragraph about the ad hoc committee, and further that council directs staff to form an ad hoc committee or a suitable alternative with either terms of reference or terms of engagement consisting of citizen members or input from these diverse minority populations in order to provide input on the development of the equity inclusion policy due back to council for consideration on October 24th. Does that achieve? So essentially it's an ad hoc committee or a suitable alternative.
I think it's October 26th, was it? Sorry, just to clarify the date, did you say October 26th? Sorry.
Sorry, I said the end of summer, so August.
Oh, sorry, August, okay.
The reason I was saying that is because if we do the ad hoc way, we'd have to do that, you know, some stuff extra just to get ready for that, and they have to start meeting before December 7th, that's all.
Okay, thank you for that amendment. Are there any questions or comments on these amendments? Councillor Darling?
Thank you. I'm going to plead some ignorance here in the acronym that's used. I myself like to see an acronym at least spelled out in brackets so everybody, when reading the policy, understands exactly what the acronym means, if that's at all possible.
Councillor Beattie, are you able to provide a definition of that acronym?
Off the top of my head, no. I can clarify that the 2S at the beginning is specifically about inclusion, and that version of our queer alphabet is more inclusive. We put the 2S at the front in order to show solidarity with Indigenous people and in recognition of our need to put their needs at the forefront of all that we do. If Councillor Darling would be so kind as to, I can commit to getting that broken down acronym from the Cobourg Queer Collective and forward that to the clerk to be included for the publishing of the regular council agenda next Monday, if you'd be so kind to give me that grace.
Yeah, that's acceptable. I just think everybody should, if it's going to be in our policies, it should be understood what it is for. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good idea for the sake of clarity. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. Oh, or sorry, are we calling the vote on the amendment? The vote on the amendment. Okay, so calling the vote on Councillor Beattie's amendments. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And it carries. Mr. Larmer, can I give you the job of reading the amended motion so that we can vote on it, please?
So, through the chair, moved by Councillor Chorley, whereas the Black Lives Matter movement has highlighted the need for a reaffirmed commitment to confronting racism and removing systemic barriers to equality. And whereas fostering an inclusive and welcoming community is a key tenet of the Town of Cobourg's annual Pride Month. And whereas municipal council can play a leading role in helping to achieve gender equality. Therefore, be resolved that council instructs staff to draft an equity and inclusion policy. And further that, the policy specifically addresses the inclusion of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, women, people with disabilities, newcomers to Canada, the 2SLGBTQIAP+ community, and other visible minorities. And further that, the policy draws upon resources such as Advancing Equity and Inclusion, a guide for municipalities, and FCM's Diverse Voices Toolkit. And further that, the policy includes annual commitments to equity and inclusion training for Town of Cobourg staff, volunteers, and members of council, engagement of citizens and advisory committees, and communications on progress. And further that, council directs staff to form an ad hoc committee or a suitable alternative with the terms of reference or terms of engagement consisting of citizen members from these diverse minority populations in order to provide input on the development of equity and inclusion policy due back to council on August 24th, 2020 meeting. And further that, the draft policy presented to council for consideration by December 7th, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Larmer. Any questions before I call the vote? Councillor Beattie?
I'm terribly sorry. I was quickly able to get a response to a breakdown of the acronym. I'm happy to share that now, or I can just forward it to the clerk.
Oh, please feel free to share it.
Mr. Larmer, I will copy and paste this to you in an email. The acronym for the 2SLGBTQIA+ refers to lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, two-spirit, intersex, and asexual peoples, as well as those who identify as pansexual, questioning, non-binary, and other gender and sexual minorities, as defined by McGill University. And one of my peers from the queer community just forwarded me a link to this definition of the acronym.
Thank you. And if Mr. Larmer, you can include that in this motion when it's going into the minutes, please. Okay, and with that, I think we're ready to call the vote on this motion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And it carries.
Next, Your Worship, we have Protection Services, and we have Chair Councillor Aaron Burkett.
I have one item tonight. It's a memo from the municipal clerk, manager of legislative services, in regards to the potential introduction of a social or physical distancing bylaw for the corporation of the Town of Cobourg during the COVID-19 pandemic. Referred from the June 1st, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting. Action recommended the council receive the report from the municipal clerk, manager of legislative services for information purposes, and further that council approve and provide direction to staff to implement the proposed bylaw to promote and regulate physical distancing within the Town of Cobourg in order to help prevent the spread COVID-19, to reinforce the importance of physical distancing as additional measures to protect the health and well-being of all residents within the Town of Cobourg. Obviously, the clerk has spoke to this in the past. Are there any questions from members of council at this point? Councillor Burrow?
Yeah, through you to Mr. Larmer. Is this physical distancing now with the bubble of 10 still apply? Can you explain how this would apply to that bubble of 10? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand your question.
It's a late night.
So these through Chair to the members of council. So obviously this is a referral from a report that was tabled on April 27th, 2020. As we know, that was a different time during the COVID-19 pandemic related to closures and restrictions of different things from the province of Ontario. Currently from that time, we're on stage 2 of our reopening of Ontario and our framework for that purpose. Obviously, there's been many things that have closed, and now we're kind of flipping verses and we're trying to implement everything going forward. Regarding the reopening of certain amenities. As you're well aware, the province releases regulations consistently almost every 2 weeks, especially when they extend the order. So there's a number of different items that we're trying to look at and complete based on different operations and other facilities, amenities, and those things that we, as a town, run. When this report was first drafted, it was basically as a tool for members of enforcement agency to use and for something the council consider, obviously when things were different. In regards to since then, we've had a number of changes, particularly related to the bubble, or what the 10-person social circle that the province has come out with, allowing people to come in and come out. Outside of that circle, basically what it still is recommended is that physical distancing still occurs, but obviously it's pretty hard because we don't take an inventory of everyone's circle and we don't ask them to submit that to the government, the province, or ourselves and try to regulate that. So that can prove to be difficult. With this physical distancing bylaw, I think what the intent was to help enforce precautions and make sure people were adhering to physical distancing. I think we've all been out in the public for the last 3 months, and we've understood that a lot of people are taking this serious, are keeping their physical distance from each other, which is good to see. But when it comes to certain open areas that the province has opened, there has been a couple of public areas that the province has left out of physical distancing. For example, open spaces and parks, as well as beaches, for example. Currently, right now, as the regulations come out, particularly with phase 2, the government has started to implement physical distancing restriction in their own regulations. For example, phase 2 that just came out, general compliance, there's 2 sections on the reopening of certain businesses and organizations where it speaks to physical distancing as being a requirement and could be enforceable under the Emergency Measures and Civil Protection Act. That would already be there for enforcement. For example, one of the provisions say the person responsible for a business that is open to the public or an organization responsible for a facility that is open to the public at the end must maintain and be responsible for physical distancing of at least 2 meters and kind of enforcing that. So basically, we open one of our amenities and facilities that is allowed to be open. We're responsible to enforce that, and that's in the current regulation. When we talk about restaurants and bars, which was one of the interesting factors we had to look into regarding physical distancing, especially on their patios. When it first came out, there was no restrictions or different penalties that could come up for physical distancing. The province has amended the regulations regarding outdoor patios and bars for physical distancing requirements. And that would be the responsibility of the restaurant and bar owner to make sure that all their seating, those places where people are going to eat, are maintained at a physical distance, and people are, not roaming around and going in and out of groupings and infringing on people's physical distancing. So if we had a complaint, for example, a restaurant from a restaurant owner, which I'm not sure we would, but we could come in there and say that you have to start enforcing, you have to move these tables so they'd be physically distant. An interesting regulation as part of the province has included is that if a group of people walk through a door of a private business like a restaurant and bar, it is not the responsibility of that restaurant owner to enforce physical distance between those groups. So they come in, it's up to them, so we wouldn't have to police that. So basically what I'm trying to get around to is that the province is starting to put in all the reopening provisions a requirement of physical distancing within there, especially when it comes to amenities and parks and those things. What they have left out is what they've consistently left out is the open spaces like parks and beaches areas. There's no physical distancing requirements in that. There's just recommendations. So all in all, the bylaw is there as written from April 27th. My recommendation to staff is this is still a tool. We could shelf this or at council's disposal in case there is a second wave or some sort that maybe this comes back to council to consider. But I would definitely recommend if we are looking at reopening the beach that we include in that beach bylaw maybe some physical distancing requirements in there. And what that would do is be similar to the province. We're starting to reopen our own amenity, which is the Cobourg Beach, and we could add a regulation regarding physical distancing in there. So that's a long-winded summary on some of the different changes that happened since April 27th.
Thank you, Mr. Larmer. Are there any other questions from members of council on this item? Your worship, and then Councillor Chorley.
Through you, Chair, Councillor Burkett, just some information. It's a balancing act because I know the Premier is speaking about maybe extending the EMCPA to July 15th. And at the same time, when I work with member of MPP Piccini, there is word on the market that now with Toronto and Halton moving to phase 2 this coming Wednesday, with the only exception now being Windsor Essex is in phase 1, the only one in the province. There's strong rumor that within that time, Ontario could be moving to phase 3, which is the final phase. So at this point, I'm satisfied the government province is working in the right area. I'm like Mr. Lammer's suggestion, maybe some consideration for the beach only because again, when the health unit showed the recommended model, they showed a model, I think it was from Europe with the zoning off, with the elements of 10, with the 2-meter distance. There's different ways of doing it. But I think we could keep this perhaps around just in case we do face a second wave in the fall, sometimes a predetermination that could be forthcoming. We don't know yet. We remain hopeful that won't happen, but I remain satisfied at this time based on our numbers and based on our metrics that I think we can have it nearby if we need it based on our own metrics. But as I've gone out and spoken to a lot of people, I have to say visitors, people like in Cobourg are certainly following the model for the most part. And I thank Mr. Larmer for his explanation because a lot has gone back to different organizations and the owners with the new motions, as he's indicated, from the province in terms of regulatory. So I feel we've come a long way in the last maybe 100 days. So just comments.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Chorley.
My perspective is very similar to Mayor Henderson's based on the comments from the clerk. It sounds like the province has covered off the need for physical distancing rules through provincial regulations, the only exception being open spaces, parks and beaches. And tonight we've asked for a bylaw draft to come to us regarding the beach. So I would imagine we can incorporate some physical distancing rules in that bylaw. And I think that targeted approach would be more appropriate than this, which has quite a broad scope. So likewise, I think it might be worth having this available if the situation were to worsen in future. But at this time, I don't feel that it's necessary.
Okay, Councillor Burrow.
Okay, I'll put a motion on the floor to table this until October, or defer it till October, because just in case we need it, if there is a second wave, we can look at it then.
Your Worship, you got a comment for that?
Yes, if I may, through you to Councillor Burrow. The only comment I have, based on your recommendation, if there is a second wave, they're predicting through all the studies that it would happen in September, October. So October could be too late if we really ended up in a second wave. So just for your information, it's very much in alignment with flu season, if to your point, just so you're aware.
And just a comment to you, Councillor Burrow. I believe if you table the motion, I don't believe you have to put a timeline on it. We can bring it back as I did in the previous meeting. Is that correct, Mr. Larmer?
Yes. I'm going to say yes, but I just want to double check something.
While you're checking
I think what the better thing would be do, because I'm not sure if you can table the motion twice. So I think what Councillor Bureau might be trying to get is refer it to the fall to bring back to council similar to this one and then bring it back for discussion. I think if you add to the motion that also staff could bring it earlier if there is a need or that purpose, something added in the motion on that if you think.
Okay, Councillor Beatty, do you have a comment on the amendment or discussion on that?
The clerk, thank you. The clerk answered that for me. It was a question through you to the clerk. If we were just to asking Councillor Bureau to maybe just add to it and have it be reviewed by council at a date in September or referred to the fall, very much like the mayor and Councillor Chorley. I was interested in this a few weeks ago, but now that stage 2 is opening and now that we have a satisfactory unanimous support for reopening of the beach, and the beach access bylaw will cover that, I too feel that it would be unnecessary and possibly redundant at this time. But I don't want to see it go into the abyss that we could never bring it back forward should we find ourselves in worse off circumstances if the second wave was to come.
Okay, thank you for that. So would you like to amend your amendment there, Councillor Burrow?
Sure. A motion to refer this to the fall of 2020. Does it have to be a specific date, or could it just be the fall?
And would you also care to possibly put in if or sooner if a second wave happens?
Yes. Wow, it's been a long day. So motion to refer the social distancing bylaw to the fall and to be brought back sooner by staff if need be, if necessary.
Does that sound good, Mr. Larmer?
Yeah, at some reason as clerk, I prefer a date. So September 14th or October 5th. Those are kind of two dates, or the October 26th, maybe the whole meeting.
Why don't we do this? What was the second date? Sorry?
October 5th.
Yeah, why don't we do October 5th? If that's going to be, my thinking is if the kids are going back to school and that's when the flu season is starting, it's going to take some time for everything to get going again. So, sorry, what was the date again? October
5th.
So refer the social distancing bylaw motion to October 5th committee of the whole meeting, and if necessary to be brought back sooner by staff.
Is that clear by everyone? Any questions on the amendment, or sorry, referring the motion? I'll see none. Call the vote on that. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Next, Your Worship, we're on to Arts, Culture, and Tourism Services, and we have Chair Councillor Adam Bira.
All right. Is that the one I sent you, Mr. Larmer?
No, I'm going to pull that up.
All right. I can start reading it if that's okay.
No, it's okay. Just 1 second.
Okay. Moved by Deputy Mayor Suzanne Sagan that the DBIA Board of Management recommend to Council that King Street be closed from Spring Street to McGill Street for 4 trial weekends with dates of July 17th to July 19th, July 31st to August 3rd, August 21st to the 23rd, and September 4th to September 7th. Whereas the restaurant, bars, and coffee shops have had a terrible hardship since COVID-19 due to the provincial shutdown, and whereas the Downtown Business Improvement Area Board wanted to help all members of the downtown by making King Street a pedestrian-only street to expand patios on King Street for 4 trial weekends in July and and September. Where the King Street road closure will commence on each selected Friday at 9 a.m. with the road reopening on each selected Sunday or holiday Monday at 10 p.m. And whereas the DBIA Board of Management recognizes that the road closure is not an event and rather a pedestrian-friendly area to showcase and assist our DBIA members. Whereas the road closure will follow fire, police, emergency, and liquor requirements set out by the municipality, and whereas the DBIA will apply for the patio extensions and liquor licenses for each place, and whereas the DBIA will pay for fencing and tables for the restaurants, bars, and coffee shops so they can have extra seating to help make ends meet. Whereas the DBIA Board of Management will hire a security guard from 11 to 6 p.m. each day for other road closure to promote physical distancing and educate where applicable. Now therefore be resolved that Council approve the recommendations that the DBIA Board of Management's pedestrian-friendly trail weekends. Trail at the end, it's trial. I'm gonna open this up for discussion. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I think Councillor Beattie had her hand up first, and then the mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a few questions, so I'll just ask one at a time, and then if you can come back to me after other members of council have had a chance to ask questions. Obviously, I'm fully in support of this, and I hope it's a successful pilot to build on for summers to come. However, I do have a few questions. The first is, I believe somewhere in the literature I read, or maybe in speaking to some DBIA members, the board did survey its members. Yep. Do you happen to know offhand the results of the survey to inform council? And I guess in particularly, I'm wondering if any of the retail or takeout only tenants had any concerns on how this may impact their curbside pickup operations.
We did do the survey. I don't have it in front of me or those numbers. I can get them to you though. After the survey was done, and on the weekend, I did go out to almost every restaurant and talk to a lot of the merchants on the street as well. And they're all happy to give it a go and give it a try. The 4 weekends aren't set in stone, and we wanted to do a pilot on the first weekend because in Peterborough, they did do this and it wasn't a success. So we thought, well, Peterborough in here is a lot different, and we thought we'd try it once, see how it goes. If it goes well, then we continue on. If it doesn't, then we would cancel the project. Also, I did amend the dates to the last weekend or to the Labor Day weekend in September. I don't think that was enough time at the beginning. From, I believe the first date was July 3rd to 5th. I don't think that's enough time to get all the paperwork and everything in order to start on that weekend. So I think the 17th would be the perfect time to start as well. Mayor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Councilor Barreau. I'm assuming when you say these are set up and fencing, whatever it might be, or parameters, I'm just making a strong assumption these would also be checked by either Mr. Larmer or the health unit?
Absolutely. Each of the applications would be easier if they came from one person instead of each of the restaurants and coffee shops expanding their own and doing the whole process. The DBIA staff would take care of that.
Okay, and my second question, if I may, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going back to the olden days when we were able to have our DBIA events and we had celebrations on our main street. And it was really, as you're indicating in your motion, a pedestrian-friendly venue for everyone. So a clothing store could bring stuff out if they so desired under the right conditions. Would that still be allowed for other business merchants as well? In other words, does it emulate that kind of feel?
Okay, so let me walk you down the street on how it would look. There would be, the other merchants could put stuff outside as well. There'll be no entertainment, no rides, no anything like that. It would be fenced off patios so that because some restaurants are side by side, we wanted to make sure that they followed all the AGCO requirements as well as the municipality's requirements. They can put a table out if that store member feels safe and they want to do that. They don't have to. There's no requirement for them to do that. Basically, this was to extend the patios for the food establishments so that they can get capacity seating at some point. Councillor Turley.
Councillor Bureau, this plan sounds like it would greatly benefit some of the restaurants and cafes in our downtown. And I think certainly as a council, we need to do everything we can to support those businesses right now. But I'm just wondering if you could share any feedback you've received from other types of businesses. How would they perceive this kind of pedestrianized plan? Would it benefit or hinder other types of businesses?
Well, that's a good question. Anytime that the road is closed in the past, whether it be for an event or this, not everybody likes the road closures. You're not going to be able to satisfy all the 255 businesses. But what I can tell you is the ones that did have issues with it did reach out and talk to me, and they are on board for a 1-week trial to see how it goes. If that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Councillor Bureau. Another question I had was in the line that the DBIA was going to apply for the patio permits, which I think is a nice service to downtown businesses. Can you just clarify? It also says, and applying for the liquor licenses. So is the DBIA looking to be the liquor license permit, or am I correct in understanding that if the establishment is already licensed, their individual alcohol permit would apply to their extended patio into the street?
Correct.
And then non-licensed establishments, say for just a coffee shop, would not be allowed to serve alcohol because they do not have a license to serve alcohol.
You are.
So the DBIA is not applying for.
No, it was the
license.
patio extensions. It should have been patio extensions.
So maybe
I'll make that change.
Right. So maybe just yourself through you to the clerk.
Yeah.
The DBIA doesn't need to get any additional AGCO approved permits. If we approve the stock standard, prefab, or everyone's going to have kind of a mimicked patio extend onto the street, the individual business with their individualized liquor permit, that will extend to the patio onto the street.
Correct. So Mr. Lambert, can we change that? Please and thank you.
And can you just clarify, when you say fence, you don't mean snow fence, you mean like a partition or a patio barrier?
It's just barriers. Yes, Councillor Beattie.
I apologize, but I think these are important questions. I'm clearly fully supportive of this, but I do just want to make sure that I understand all the requirements. Your motion also states take into consideration public health, fire, police, emergency protocols that are usually in place. So my understanding is if King Street is closed all the way to McGill, however, we have now closed off any emergency vehicle access. So will part of King east of Division have to just be closed and there be one-way traffic to allow emergency vehicles, or how will that be navigated? And can you also explain on the topic of security, why the cost of a commissionaire security guard would be required if this is just a pedestrian mall, it's not a special event, and the permit doesn't require that level of security?
Those are all great questions. So to start off, with the emergency routes, Division is open. We're not closing Division. And let me know if I'm saying anything wrong, Mr. Larmer, if that's okay. Division will be open, and they have also emergency detour routes elsewhere other than King Street East. So that's the problem with the King Street East, was that McCoubrey's funeral home is on that, and generally when the events happen on the weekend, it's really not a good fit with having a funeral on those weekends. But we did clear it with McCoubrey's, and they said they had no problem with that as well. Next question was the fire and safety. So every time that you do a road closure, and if you are doing anything like that, you have to make sure, like extending the patios or anything, you have to make sure that there's 12 foot of clearance for that emergency vehicle that could go through a fire truck, because they got to be able to have access to the tops of the roofs in the downtown, as well as access to anywhere in the downtown. So even though it's closed, there's still enough room for a fire truck to go down the middle of the road. The same with the police and the health, that would all fall under the restaurants and everything else. Does that answer your questions? Is there more?
Yes, on the topic of security, I had asked a question about the commissionaires and why that was a necessary.
Why? Because the DBA board felt that if it does happen to get crowded and people are afraid that, or wasn't social distancing or physical distancing, sorry, they would be having just an on hand for an education, a warning of people walking around. Yep.
I have one last question, unless another member of council does. Otherwise, I'll just ask it and then I'll keep myself muted. I love this. I absolutely do. To Councillor Chorley's point about making sure we can do all that we can for our businesses, and we heard from two restaurants earlier this evening, the Ale House and George and Orange. I can also think of Craft, Cucina Urbana. I'm not quite sure, other restaurants that if you don't have the opportunity, essentially if your establishment is not front facing on King Street, these businesses, even though they're members of the DBIA and in the downtown, and I'm not suggesting additional road closures, but has the DBIA or we as a council, can we think of ways that we can help these businesses not on King Street? Essentially, if you're not on King Street, you're not going to benefit from this extended patio, which is all about trying to expand their potential to earn additional revenue. So I just, I kind of empathize for those that are not on King Street and what alternatives we can do to them so that they can benefit too on those weekends.
That's true. Well, that's an ongoing problem. That's not a problem that's just now. Every road closure that has happened in the time that I know of, if you're not on King Street, then you're more than welcome to come into the road closure. Restaurants generally don't, because it's really hard to maintain staff to bring food to the road closure, although we are looking at different options and different ways that they can come up. For instance, when there was the Tasty Tuesday event that happened a few years back, where everybody brought out their food in kind of a tent and stuff like that. There was also, we do invite the DBA members into the road closure who doesn't have a store. They always get first priority. So it would be up to the DBA coordinator to go and talk with those other restaurants to see if they want to come in and how that would work.
And to that point then, so for example, I don't want to, I did talk to them, so I don't want them to get upset that I'm using their name, but Craft, for example, or
right.
Croissant example, George and Orange, for example, they're licensed. So they'd have an opportunity to say, maybe bring a pop-up patio into King Street if they wanted to, or DBIA approved. But then how does their liquor license apply? Is it just carried over onto King Street?
I couldn't tell you that. That would be up to, so we got to look at it this way also. I understand that we need to help everybody, but on the road closures, and when you go and rent your space downtown where you decide to put your business, and you've done your research, you would know that you would not be in the road closures. You would know that when the events happen, that doesn't happen. That doesn't always happen. So what the DBIA does is throughout the year, a regular year, we try to make different events and different ways to to help all the businesses. If they can come in and there's a way to do it, then we'll do it. If it can't happen, then we'll look at other different opportunities for the outside of the King Street.
I do apologize for council, and if I just may, through you, Councillor Bureau, as chair, to the clerk, could the clerk, if he's able to answer that question as to if an off King Street restaurant was permitted a pop-up patio on King Street when it was closed and they were a licensed establishment, would their existing permit, alcohol permit, be able to extend onto King Street, or is it only, do you understand what I'm trying to clarify?
Yeah. Yep, I do. And through you, Chair, to the member council, I asked this very question to the Alcohol Gaming Commissioner Inspector for our area. And the amendment to the Liquor License Act, which was, I can't remember the exact amendment, I think it was 719, made a couple of changes. One of the changes was regarding the temporary extension of the physical size of their outdoor patio to be approved by the municipality, subject to staff approval. And they gave 4 points, and I'll bring your attention to 1 point, which says the physical extension of the premises is adjacent to the premises to which the license to sell liquor applies. I posed that question. I said, can you please provide me with a definition of what you think is an adjacent to the premises to which the license to sell liquor applies? And they said to me, it would be the municipality's decision on what would be adjacent or not. So technically, what the province did in their letter, the Minister Clark and the Attorney General Officer gave to councils, which maybe I should have forwarded that. I'm not sure where it ended in the number of letters we received, but they said that council need to be innovative in regards to this, and they could consider a park or an area of space to allow for this to happen, to have the extension of their patios. Obviously, there'd be concerns on some effect how many would get in there, but it could be a rotating basis. But again, that innovative part of the municipality is there. So a really quick answer is that it would be up to us to decide what adjacent is.
Thank you so much. And through you, Chair, if I may, just a follow-up question to the clerk. Would we then have to define, and that's great, that innovative definition of adjacent, should we be defining that in this motion? Or depending on what comes of the request of DBIA members, deal with it at a later time? Like, I just want to make sure we're getting everything addressed possible in this motion. So do we need to define what that adjacent is now, or?
I think that getting around through your chair and member council, that amendment could go on the floor for the resolution to define an adjacent premises where outside or all restaurants could apply for. So basically, you could put the motion that any restaurant that's licensed that wishes to extend their patio could apply to the town to be on King Street for their extension of their outdoor patio. That could work, and that resolution would satisfy the requirement of the AGO, because council, we have been given the authority to provide authority for granted this patio extension. So if you put in the resolution as that's what your definition of adjacent is, you picked a designated area as King Street that's closed, that could satisfy that requirement.
Thank you. Then just to wrap this all up, I am willing to you, Councillor Bureau, to put a motion to amend on the floor. Believe if my memory is serving what I heard from the clerk, and further that council define I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask the clerk again for some suggested wording.
I would suggest maybe opening it up as those outside restaurants in King Street that have a liquor license could apply to be placed on King Street. I just want to say that we're now heading to the jurisdiction of the DBIA area. So I just want to make sure that maybe alternative place would be there. I just think that this is a DBIA motion for DBIA members, so I just want to clarify that. But you could say that as well as this location be opened up for patio extension applications for all of Town of Cobourg licensed premises.
I would see it as just being DBIA members. So then, thank you. So the motion to amend is that council approve licensed establishments within the defined DBIA parameter to apply for a patio extension on King Street, and their liquor license would apply.
Or
To use Chair, Council Bureau, I'm not quite sure if you're waiting for me to
I
read
was
that again.
waiting for Mr. Lawrence.
So that council approve all licensed establishment within the DBI parameters to apply for a temporary patio extension to be located as part on King Street as part of the pedestrian friendly zone. Road closure.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on that? Councillor Chorley?
I would just like to quickly say, I think that's an important amendment, and thank you for pursuing it. The only question is really, are there any safety concerns with having patios which serve alcohol some distance from their home establishment? But because this motion includes some additional security, I'm satisfied that this can be done safely. So I think this is a really good amendment.
Any other discussion? All right, I'll call the vote on the amendment. All in favor? Against? Carried? Do I have to read the whole motion again, Mr. Larmer?
I think if council agrees to with the amendment, we can just read it as amended and vote on that if you'd like, Councilor Bureau.
Okay. So I'll read it again. I move by Deputy Mayor Seguin that the DBIA Board of Management recommended to council that King Street be closed from Spring Street to McGill Street for 4 trial weekends with the dates of July 17th to July 19th, July 31st to August 3rd, August 21st to August 23rd, September 4th to September 7th. Whereas the restaurants, bars, and coffee shops have had terrible hardships since COVID-19 due to the provincial shutdown, and whereas the Downtown Business Improvement Area Board wanted to help all members of the downtown by making King Street a pedestrian-only street to expand patios on King Street for 4 trial weekends in July and August 2020. And whereas the King Street road closure will commence on each selected Friday at 9 a.m. with the road opening on each selected Sunday or holiday Monday at 10 p.m. And whereas the DBIA Board of Management recognized the road closure is not an event and rather a pedestrian-friendly area to showcase and assist our DBIA memberships. And whereas the road closure will follow fire, police, emergency, and patio extensions set out by the municipality. And whereas the DBA will apply for the patio extensions and liquor, oh, no, that's wrong. I'm just going to take that out. Whereas the DBA will apply for the patio extensions for each place, and whereas the DBA will pay for fencing and tables for the restaurants, bars, and coffee shops so they can have extra seating to help make ends meet. And whereas the DBA Board of Management will hire a security guard from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. each date of a road closure to promote physical distancing and educate where applicable. Now that therefore be resolved, Council will approve the recommendations that the DBI Board of Management's pedestrian-friendly trial weekends, and further that with.
Do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. And further that, Council approve that all licensed establishment in the DBI parameters to be permitted to apply for a temporary patio extension on King Street as part of the pedestrian-friendly zones approved road closure.
Thank you. All right. Any discussion? Mayor Henderson?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Burrow. Minor point, would you consider replacing fencing with barrier or partitions?
Sure.
Something a little bit more friendly?
Sure, we can do barriers.
Thank you.
That's okay, I'll just make the change to barriers from fencing.
Any other discussion? Call the vote, all in favor? Carried. All right.
Okay, Your Worship. Next we have unfinished business, and it's listed on the agenda. Just to note, the first one can come off. We had our meeting prior to that, so I missed that one. Other than that, I haven't received anything for council open forum.
Okay, thank you.
Next, Your Worship, we have a closed session.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. The closed session. Action recommended that council meet in closed session in accordance with section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001 regarding S 239(2)B, personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. 1, personnel matter. 2, the S 239(2)C, A, proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality of local board, which is an offer to purchase land, municipal land, Lucas Point Industrial Park, and S 239(2)B, labor relations or employee negotiations, QB Local 25 negotiations.
Thank you. Any further comment, discussion, members of council?
Just a correction, Your Worship, that the third one should be D, not B. I apologize.
Okay,
D,
as amended.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Larmer. Any comment otherwise? All those in favor? Carried. And Mr. Larmer, are you just going to link us up, or do we have to go back in and out?
No, so I'm just going to stay on, but I asked everyone to mute and hide your screen, and I will exit the live stream and then remove the live streaming from that.
Okay, thank you.